presentation for us?
Yeah, I thought we would just start to go over some of the changes. I apologize that I was not at the first public hearing. As you know, I had COVID and was in quarantine, so unfortunately I missed that, and I think we had a greater audience at that point, but a lot of those folks that came to the meeting did come and meet with me in person to go over and share feedback also, so that was great. So
I'd just like to say that I'm glad you didn't come to the meeting.
I think everyone is. I don't think anyone really needed to see me on Zoom that day either. So yeah, I thought I would just kind of run through. I think there's still a couple questions that we have related to the accessory dwelling unit bylaw, some things that, you know, we need the board to make a decision on with which direction we're going to go. But I'll kind of just, you know, for the public hearing, kind of go over the changes we're proposing for both bylaws, and then we can have a discussion and with the public as to what we want to see moving forward. Okay, so as you know, we're going to do proposed changes to the accessory dwelling unit bylaw. We're discussing language for permitting a second ADU, if that's the direction the board would like to go, proposed changes to the merger bylaw, and then we can take questions. So as you know, this all came about with the Affordable Homes Act from August 6th. It changed the way we can regulate and define accessory dwelling units. They became a protected class in Massachusetts. So they're 900 square feet or under, and they're by right in all single-family residential districts. So kind of what changed from our current regulations to what the state's imposing, we can no longer regulate owner occupancy for either the ADU or the primary dwelling. We can no longer require a special permit or any other discretionary zoning relief for the use or rental of the accessory dwelling unit for the first one. We can require one parking space for an ADU, and then there's the second part of that is language related to if you're an MBTA community or if you're in relation to rail, subway station, ferry, etc., which doesn't apply to us here, so we require one parking space for an ADU. So then as we kind of go into some of the revisions, this would be the new definition for an accessory dwelling unit. It's a self-contained housing unit inclusive of sleep and cooking facilities. So we can still regulate setbacks on the lot, and we can regulate the size of it, but we can no longer regulate lot size in relation to whether or not you would be able to have one. So they're by right for each single family home. So an ADU, what does that mean? It's an accessory dwelling unit. It can be constructed within a single family, attached to a single family, or as a completely separate structure. So it could be a remodel of your basement to meet safety standards for an accessory dwelling unit. It could be a rehab of your garage to be able to have an apartment in there. It could be a single standalone cottage. It must conform to all state regulations still. It's just the local ones that have changed. So state building code still applies, Title V still applies, which is the septic, and other sanitary codes, and then all other lawful provisions that we can regulate under zoning and Conservation Commission, Historic District Committee approval. All of those still apply. Dimensional requirements per section 2600 shall govern the creation. 2600 is our dimensional table, so that really just lists out lot coverage, setbacks, basically where you can place it on your lot and whether or not you would have enough lot coverage to place a standalone building, or whether it might necessarily need to be within the single family home. As we mentioned, parking, so at least one off-street parking space in addition to that required for the principal single-family dwelling is required. The principal dwelling and the ADU. The ADU is accessory to the principal dwelling. It should not be severed in ownership. It is supposed to be sold together, so that is something that we could still regulate within the bylaw. And then neither the primary dwelling or the ADU can be used for boarding or lodging, commercial uses, including short-term rentals or seasonal rentals. And then no occupancy of the ADU is permitted other than by lease for a minimum of 12 consecutive months, which I think is one of the things that we still wanted to talk about, the language for that. And then we can kind of move on to the opt-in option. So this is another area that we needed a little bit more discussion on, was whether or not we wanted to allow a second ADU for each dwelling by special permit. So this board would be the special permit granting authority. There would definitely be a lot more conditions that you could place on it that aren't listed here in the bylaw. You could require owner occupancy. I don't think we could change the size with the special permit. I think the special permit, the definition of what an ADU is, and that those size requirements would still have to be complied with. And it says that we don't use variances for these, so I think that you would just be looking more at site design and protections for the neighborhood when it comes to permitting a second ADU. And that's the ADU one. I don't know if you want me to move on to lot merger now, or should we stay on ADU until whatever you prefer?
Yeah, maybe ADU and just bucket them.
Jeff had a question.
No, I was going to suggest we stay on ADUs and give us an
that makes
opportunity to
sense.
ask you questions
Yeah.
and then get those resolved. I do have some questions put on
Sure.
people.
And I ran through that very quickly because, I mean, you're all pros at it at this point.
Could you, on the discretionary zoning, it was an earlier slide, could you further define what's, there it is. No, go back, right there, it says you can no longer require this or other discretionary zoning approval. So can you further define what's meant by that and give us an example?
So for zoning approval, typically special permit, I mean, a variance wouldn't apply here. What's interesting is they use that verbiage because we are allowed to use site plan review, which would be another form of discretionary zoning approval.
Right.
So it's contradictory in nature, because we did learn from council that we are allowed to do a site plan review process.
Okay.
And there is no other type of zoning, bar special permit, variance, site plan review, comprehensive permit. I mean, that wouldn't apply, so.
Okay, I didn't, okay. So you've answered my question. I couldn't think of an example, and you answered that. Okay. The other thing is, I think I just heard you say, so on the second ADU, if we decide to do a second ADU, did I hear you correctly? Let me restate what I think I heard you say. The second ADU would also fall under the 900 square foot?
Yes.
So when you held the public hearing, it wasn't public hearing, when you held the public session at the Center for Active Living, you spoke about what was called an XL ADU.
Correct.
So is that a no now?
So an XL ADU would have to be a completely separate bylaw. So it's something that I think that the board should consider, and we should probably discuss this summer.
But that's not,
But it's not what
not limited to the 900.
An ADU, we could craft that ourselves as to what size we want. So
Okay.
so basically with this one, we have to comply with the definition that the state gave us, including if we permit a second ADU, we can have different discretionary conditions attached, but the framework of the size would have to remain the same for the second. What I had spoken about previously was our community would really prefer to have 900 square feet of habitable space, which is what they're accustomed to and what really makes them more livable, especially if we're seeing downsizing and elderly moving in with accessibility and widening of hallways and bathrooms and all of that. You kind of almost need a little bit of a larger footprint. So it's something that we should discuss and perhaps bring up this summer to do, and like almost like an addendum to this, where maybe by special permit you could get a larger ADU, but it would be slightly different.
Okay, so if I could just finish, I got a couple more questions, and then I'll gladly turn it over.
Just a jump off.
So I just for clarity, for me, is in order to comply with the state, we have to have an ADU bylaw which allows for one unit. The state's going to allow, if we choose, to put a second ADU on that lot if we choose to bring that in. We're not required to bring that in.
Correct.
But if we bring it in, we must still comply with things like the 900,
Yes.
okay, of total space, not just habitable, okay? And then in addition to that, if we wanted to, we could have a third item, I'll use that term, which is this specific to us ADU bylaw, and you had referred to it as XL, and someone that came to the public hearing, you weren't here, they also recalled you and they asked about the XL because they were really looking for something larger. So we could eventually get there if we wanted to.
We can.
The state doesn't limit us.
The
Okay.
state doesn't limit us. The way I try to frame it in my mind is this one that came down is the protected class ADU.
Okay.
And if we want to do something different, we can absolutely do that as long as we have this one.
As long as we have this one. Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
And the last question I have with respect to ADUs right now is, with respect to, we, on the books, have an ADU bylaw. My understanding, and that's what I'm trying to understand if I'm correct, my understanding is that we can no longer enforce it or enact it or work. So if someone came to you today and said, I want an ADU, you cannot use the one that's currently sitting there.
Right.
I thought you
And
could still
that-
use it. I was told, because I was looking to use that one and I heard it was still available until, so you could, as currently drafted, get the protected class, but that bylaw is still in effect, that it hasn't been revoked.
So
That was the understanding that I had.
our town council said that we cannot enforce our bylaw once we're in non-compliance with the state. So that we're not, so if someone comes forward with a building permit, we cannot regulate it per our current bylaw, that we should go off state guidelines or ask them to wait a couple months.
So the bylaw, the ADU bylaw currently with the habitable space and the size is not available for special permit.
No, so what happens in zoning, and it's a clause of good faith that's referenced in Massachusetts general law. Any permit that was submitted prior to the, or a building permit, whatever type of permit that was submitted prior to the first duly noticed public hearing advertisement is vested with a certain period of time that they can move forward with that project. Anything after it's been noticed, we have to look at it if it's a good faith effort or if it's you're trying to catch a clause before it changes. So it is referenced differently, depending. So it's kind of case by case.
Okay.
But the general rule is, once you kind of start this process and everyone's noticed, and specifically in this case because it actually changed at the state level, that we are no longer able to enforce our own regulations at this point, and we should fall back on those regulations.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
The next part of my question is, so given that is the current state of what we have on the books, the state one, what I'll say is, what the state has sent us, is in effect. I can't remember the exact date, but it was like just like a month ago or something.
Yeah.
So now if I come to you and I want to do an ADU, is the town allowed me to move forward with an ADU as long as it complies with what the state has officially recognized, even before Sandwich has officially recognized it?
Yeah,
Is that
that's what
true?
we've been advising residents, yeah.
Okay.
Is that they can fall under the state regulations for it.
Okay. And as we write our new bylaw, which is going to replace our old one and comply with the state one, it may have something additional. Don't say that it will or won't, but something that is allowed, but is in addition to what the state did. So, there might be something. And that, if we were to decide that and the town votes on it at the town meeting and it goes to the state and the state attorney general's office, I think that's where they go, if it approves it, and then, 90 days to 8 months down the road,
Yeah.
this thing finally comes in. It's not till then, though, that you in the town could say, oh, no, it's more than just the state. You have to have this other one provision too. Is that correct? So we're going to be in a limbo, not a limbo, we're going to be in between where we got some things that might be currently already approved under our existing. Then we're going to move to just the state one. And then somewhere down the road, we're going to move to one that's a state and maybe something else if we so choose to do that.
And what's tricky with zoning is once it's approved by the Attorney General's office, it's retroactive. So it bounces right back
Oh
to
my goodness.
May 4th or May 5th town meeting date,
It's retroactive to
the town meeting vote.
interesting. So if someone is moving forward before it gets approved, but after that date of May, they could get trapped because all of a sudden now they have to meet something they didn't have to meet previously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've been having very open conversations with anyone that's looking to apply
Sure.
to say what is the time frame? Is it something that needs to happen immediately? And kind of just run through the scenarios with them, which is very confusing. So it's hard. We've even had attorneys call and say, how are we handling this? Our land use attorneys. So we are trying to just make it as clear as possible. And a lot of people want to hold out to see if we'll do a larger size eventually, that they would prefer that. So we're kind of just giving people their options and then just letting them make the choice themselves as to which direction they want to go, because it's all very up in the air until you finally get that Attorney General.
And you just brought one other question in my mind, which I apologize, I thought I was done. So, let's say we fast forward to the future and we've got a zoning bylaw that's compliant with the state, and then we've got this, which I'll refer to the term that we've been using loosely, which we have a zoning bylaw, which is the XL. Would I be able to do an XL ADU and not have the by right ADU on the property? I would be. So I can choose them. I don't have to have a by right first.
I think, yeah, I think if you, so if we didn't go through, it will be its own standalone bylaw.
Yeah.
So if we did an ADU XL, it would just be a Town of Sandwich bylaw.
Right.
And you would be crafting it. And I would recommend it as, you could only have one of those.
Yep.
And that, you're choosing that one
Right.
to do. Like the protected class one is a separate, it's a smaller unit, it kind of has a different, and maybe we would look to get rid of our by right accessory apartment at that point because we're kind of starting to add a lot of different styles of development.
Yeah, exactly.
So we would start to look at it, but that would be completely separate to kind of this.
Okay.
And I think that maybe we wouldn't be allowing all different kinds on what property, but maybe just one of the types. Just depending, then obviously if we do the opt-in option or not.
So you're saying that the
Thank you.
extra large one could be the first one
Yes. So
and not be in violation of the state mandates on this?
No, all the state mandate says is this has to be within your zoning. It doesn't say you have to utilize it. It doesn't, so it's going to be up to the property owner to say, is this one what's best suited for me? And that's why I've been kind of telling people, if you have time to hold off, write letters to the planning board, attend a meeting, let them know that you would like them to take this up, and we'll reintroduce it in the summer. And I think we've gotten enough feedback at this point to reintroduce it in the summer, especially while it's all fresh in our minds, and maybe create an additional bylaw that people could utilize too, that we could maybe present at special town meeting. But that's obviously all up for discussion. Does that make sense?
Yes.
It gets very.
No, you did a great job explaining it. Thank you.
Did you have?
The question that I had was about the clarification on the two, essentially looking at them as two entities under the protected and then adding a third.
Yeah.
That would be completely regulated by the town, not the state.
Yeah.
So Jeff, actually your follow-up answered that for me. But I guess, so in thinking about that, if there were an XL option, let's just call it the XL option, and somebody chose to do that first, I don't think we could then do any conditions where we could prevent somebody from having a by right ADU on the property as well.
That's a good
run
point.
into some problems with.
That's a good point.
the
It could be,
practicality.
and maybe it's something that we could look at. When the time comes to draft that, we can definitely look at that. Maybe the XL is by special permit. Maybe we can ask at that time, what limitations can we make it owner occupied at that point if we're allowing it in that direction? Because everyone is, they have a right to have the by right ADU. Like that's the right. It's a protected class. So then anything in addition, we may want to look at lot size for the XL. We may want to look at owner occupancy requirements. We may want to look at a lot of different caveats on that to protect from just getting too dense, or really kind of hear what the residents want to say about that also.
Yeah, I think that's going to be an important consideration. And so on that thought, I would suggest maybe we also look at other towns if they are already fashioning some bylaws to have such an XL. I don't know myself, but
Yeah, I think everyone's just trying to grapple with this one first. I haven't heard of anyone really looking into making additional changes to it. I did speak with a planning board member from Martha's Vineyard, and he was discussing it and saying that it was, he had seen my presentation and had follow-up questions, but they actually did theirs a little bit differently. They didn't get rid of their existing ADU bylaw. They just added the by right one, was the direction they were going to go in, so that the existing still remained, so the residents could afford it either.
I had a question on the second ADU by special permit. Because the language, and I emailed this to you, but I just wanted to kind of reiterate that I'm concerned about making sure that we have effectively workshopped every possible scenario that could happen. Because there was sort of a footfall in the state regulations that it seems that it would be then up to us to make that determination, but these aren't, and it would be by special permit. The second ADU would be by special permit, so it would be coming before us, but I just want to make sure that we are kind of on top of it before it happens. And what that is if you, and I'm going loosely based on my memory because I didn't get a chance to review the state guidelines again today, but the by right ADU being up to 900 square feet, no more than half of your primary dwelling square footage. If you make it a part of your primary dwelling, in other words, it's not a separate structure, does that then reduce the square footage of your primary dwelling? So you have a 2,000 square foot house, you make the top 900 square feet, top floor, its own ADU. Does that then reduce the square footage of your primary dwelling to be 1,100 square feet? Because then your second ADU by special permit would only be allowed to be half of that, which is 550 square feet, which is basically like a shed in the Home Depot parking lot. So I just feel like I know it's important. We heard a bunch of feedback from the town, people that came to the meeting, that this is something that they would like to see. But I just want to make sure that we as a board have really thought it through to where we make it attractive and it's used and it's not just something that we're putting on there and then people are kind of like, oh, well, this doesn't really work. And I don't really know if this isn't really the time to have that conversation, but
No, absolutely. I think like as part of these discussions, when we ever look to interpret a section, we go back to see what the spirit and intent of what you put forward was. So if there's a consensus as to how that should be interpreted, it would be great to happen here in open session because we log that and say this is what the interpretation is, this is what it's supposed to be, and we just make sure that we convey that as best we can to the community as to what the intent is during the annual town meeting that we have. And I think just like the consideration too, if we're going to go towards an extra large ADU, maybe we don't do the opt-in option right now because it's kind of going to potentially give it, or maybe we say if you've got a special permit for a second ADU, you don't qualify now for an extra large one. Like we should probably kind of figure out what we want to see on the properties too, because otherwise we're kind of opening the door to potentially 3 on a property.
Now you mentioned a by right accessory apartment.
So we have a bylaw, a by right accessory apartment that's allowed for every, very similar to this, but the lot size is 10,000 square feet and above. It's a non-rental unit. And just as we start to expand, it seems like it's becoming less and less necessary because nobody's really electing for it anymore because the ADU is larger. This is only 800 square feet. The ADU is larger. You can rent it. I think it's just if we get into that question of are we mandating it has to be rented or is it discretionary rental? Like you could use it as a guest house, but if rented, it has to be for 12 consecutive months. I think we haven't fully aligned on exactly what we want to do for that. So kind of like those were kind of my outstanding questions was that some direction from the board on whether or not we were mandating it was to be rented, whether or not we were going to go with the opt-in option. And then we had discussed previously parking and the paving. So I spoke with Sam today, and I guess the engineering kind of wants it to be slightly more discretionary. They don't want to mandate that every space has to be paved because it's really site specific depending on the grade and the slope and how the drainage systems are functioning in that area and if there would be runoff. So he proposed a little bit of language that just says, that parking shall be provided in conformance with the town's driveway regulations. Surfaces shall be paved or stabilized and non-erosive as otherwise approved by the building commissioner. So it makes it clear, but a little bit more site specific in case there was an area of town which should be paved in an area of town which maybe would be fine with some type of gravel or shells. So that's for your consideration.
open it up to the public? Would you like to come and speak?
Oh, yes.
Okay, if you could sign in on that sheet.
Sure.
That table, that would be great. Just your name and address.
I'm sure I'm beating a dead horse here, and a lot of the questions that I had for the commission, I'm happy to see that you're already addressing this evening. But I'm going to go ahead and make some public comment because when I was speaking with Leanne earlier, she said it was important for you guys to hear from people in the community.
If you could just let us know your name and your address, that would be great.
My name is Jack Vaccaro, and I've lived at 16 Oriole Lane for over 30 years. And I want the commission to, I want the planning board to understand that, you know, the difference between 900 square feet of gross floor area and 900 square feet of habitable living space is significant. I'm at the very early stages of planning a ADU for my elderly in-laws. And I've engaged an architectural designer, and we've been looking at this problem. And I did this for my own parents when they were alive, built a house for them in Falmouth. And so I know what kind of space requirements there are. You need a nice wide hallway to bring a wheelchair through. You need open areas. You want the single floor living, of course, but you need to have a reasonable amount of space, and that's for elderly people. But, you know, there's a whole other segment of our community that is young people and young families. And even a couple living without kids in 900 square feet is a tight space. So I'm one of the people that's kind of stuck in limbo right now, because until this issue gets resolved, I can't advance my project. And I'm fearful that this will go a year if that doesn't get addressed until the next town meeting. Now, I understand it's too late for this town meeting, but I would hope that the planning board would be willing to support an article that could be taken up at a special town meeting sometime over the summer months, so that people like me aren't losing a year of, you know, eligibility from my elderly in-laws. That's really all I wanted to say this evening.
And what was your address? It was
16 Oriole Lane.
Oriole. Okay.
Like the bird, not the cookie.
Yeah, okay.
Can I ask you a clarifying question?
Sure.
Just to make sure. I think you're aware, the 900 is specified by the state, not by us. Okay.
Yeah.
And when you speak about an article, I think what you mean is you're speaking about bringing forward, in addition to the by right, an additional ADU that one could have that's governed by special permit by this board.
Well,
Because the by right state, we have to have that.
yes, I understand that.
And we can't change the 900, nor can we change the 900 in a future special town meeting either. Unless the state changes it, we can't change it.
I think you can expand it. Leanne, correct me if I'm wrong, because I hopped on that call that they had when they were talking about this. And I believe that they were talking about you can expand the by right allowance so you can make it broader. So if you wanted to change the definition of the by right from gross to habitable, as long as all of the, you know, you could make it more enticing for people, you just couldn't make it more restrictive. So would it be possible to perhaps look at the bylaw to make it broader?
I was told no by council.
Okay.
We were told we have to adopt the state's definition. That because at the very onset of this, once we knew we were changing from habitable to gross, we knew this was going to be a problem. Because we have permitted a lot of ADUs recently, and since we ever changed it in kind of 2020, 2021, and habitables worked for everyone. So I knew that changed. So that was one of my very first questions that, remember when I used to redline the document, that I specifically asked council, can we keep a definition of habitable? Can we not take their definition? And she said, no, you have to be consistent and take it. So that's why if we wanted to do a separate size, we need to do an additional bylaw. And maybe we don't call it ADU because it can be confusing. Maybe we call it a different type of dwelling, but.
I would just be surprised because I just feel like if the goal is to have affordable housing at the very minimum by right, this is what's allowed. But if you wanted to make that bigger and it was by right, it would push the cause even further for affordable housing. I would be surprised that they wouldn't allow you to broaden it.
It's different when it's listed under protected class. So
Okay.
there's certain state changes that you can make more restrictive, not less. There's certain
Right.
thresholds. But when you're talking about, there's not that many protected class items in land use law in Massachusetts. So
Okay.
there's only about 7, and this has now been added. So
Okay.
you're supposed to adopt it as written. So merger is another one that you have to adopt as written, because we would have loved to have slightly changed the merger doctrine way back in the 90s as to what we would kind of see, and we've never been allowed to. And it's something the zoning board has asked us to take up probably 5 times within the last 10 years, to ask us to try and just see, can we reduce this anyway? But for certain things, we're not able to.
Okay.
And honestly, I mean, I'm not an attorney, so I just listen to whatever council says when I ask those questions.
Yeah, okay, so the only way to broaden it would be to have another additional.
Yes, and then that's where XL came from. That's what she said. You would need to do another, perhaps ADU XL.
Okay.
So I'm not a
sorry,
zoning,
I had another, I would finish questioning. Can I finish? So, so it's, as you understand, I wanted to make sure we were at page, it's an additional bylaw in addition to the by right.
yeah, as I see it,
I wanted to,
Well, Jeff, we'll let him speak as well.
as I see it, it's a two-stage process. I'm not a zoning expert, but as a layman, my understanding is it's a two-stage process. First, you have to get into alignment with the state act. That would be accomplished at the regular town meeting in May. The next step is to adopt a reasonable bylaw amendment under the sandwich zoning bylaw that would allow for a modest increase. And I almost see it as bringing our local bylaw into alignment with what it was prior to the state act, which was 900 square feet of habitable living space.
yeah, that's possibly a solution, but where I was going, because I wanted to help you, you made a statement earlier that said you didn't want your project on hold for a year. When I was trying to walk you through the timeline, unfortunately, you are going to be at least a year because we are doing it in 2 steps. That is, we're doing the by right first at May, and then at a future date, we will do if we have the hearings and if there's agreement and if it moves forward, and, the likelihood of a special town meeting is probably in the fall. That's typically when they fall. So we're talking, that's the earliest we could get on a town meeting. And then if it gets approved at that town meeting, it then has to go to the state to be approved. That could be another 6 months to longer.
Their time frame is 3 months. We're supposed to hear back within 90 days.
Yeah.
There was a couple of strange ones we had recently where they kept asking for extensions.
Yeah. So my point is, that we will do the best we can.
Sure.
But you're not going to be looking at something you can do in 3 months.
No, I wasn't expecting that.
And you said a year, and I could see it being a year
Well,
before all this gets sorted out.
When I said that, what I was referring to was the year between regular town meetings. So
Yeah,
what I'm hoping that the planning
I
board
wanted you to
is
leave
do is
with-
advocate for a special town meeting where this article can be discussed, so we don't lose a full year.
I understand.
And you're looking really for more of the size, right? So you're focusing
That's-
on more gross and habitable, the definition, is that right?
That's the only concern for me,
Yeah.
and I'm not looking to build anything much larger than, 1,200 square feet. 1,100 square feet would probably do it for me, but the habitable living space is a problem.
Okay, and you can't fit under the current bylaw, he wasn't able to get onto that bylaw that we have now, just with the timing and everything?
That's right,
Okay.
yeah, so, I'm sure I'm not the only one.
Yeah, no, I'm glad that you came forward, because it is really helpful to us when we're talking about it to have the feedback, because, we're doing the best we can, and then there's
course
people
you
that are experiencing it that actually does help, so thank you for sharing that, it is helpful.
You're very welcome.
So
Thank
I'm
you.
confused about something. The by right, which is new and we need to adopt, why does that mean we have to lose the ability we already had?
It really depends on which way we would have done it putting forward. So when the way it came down to us was that, you have to adopt this. So basically, I just redlined the current version, was how we did it, was we redlined it. It gets very confusing when you have multiple different types of ADUs, so I think we should name things differently once we're finished with this ADU. But basically, we took the existing ADU bylaw and we redlined it to make it in compliance with the state. Because of course, at that point, we hadn't received all this community feedback. And then when you advertise what we're going to do, there's only certain changes that we can do at a public hearing. So, I mean, it's really up to you. Like, we can slate it and not move forward with it and retry for fall and keep the existing. We still need to make changes to the existing, and
You can't use it, and it doesn't really.
no, because we don't really
enforce
have
it.
anything else. And it just,
So it's kind of.
it's procedural. Basically, it's a procedural thing. I mean, there was, like I mentioned, Martha's Vineyard said, we're making tweaks to our own and then adding the by right one. Like, there was different ways to tackle it, but every community tackled it slightly different.
I'm just noting, right, the intent was to give people an option by right, not to limit or the options they currently had. That wasn't the intention, but
No.
you're saying, but somehow procedurally that's ended up being the result.
From redlining the original ADU bylaw, yes.
And so what's the fastest path to having another option through a special permit? What's the quickest route to that?
For us to come up with a
Another
new bylaw and then have the town.
And it would either be, and if we did a second ADU, that has to be with the same parameters, or we can do it however we want to do it.
Well, you should be able to do it however you want to do it. That's why, like, maybe we wouldn't call it an ADU. Maybe it's a tiny homes bylaw that's 900 habitable square foot. Maybe it's something we should name it differently, because we should be differentiating between the two. And that was kind of the fear when I first started going through it, was because it gets so hyper complicated and there's so many unintended consequences, that it was so much easier just to take what we had existing and revise that one and then move forward with any other changes that we may potentially need down the line. Because I think we all knew that this wouldn't be the end of the conversation when it came to accessory dwelling units.
Well, I think the big concern we had back then was also that we weren't in compliance with the state. So that was a huge concern for the town.
So say again, what is the quickest path to having a special permit option in time?
Would be to reintroduce zoning language to this board midsummer and start those conversations and get it before a special town meeting. There's no guarantee that we will have a special town meeting. I've worked here for about 7.5 years at this point. We've had one every year, but one. So but it's never a given that you're going to have one. It always just depends on if there's enough business to call a meeting. And sometimes it's in the fall. Last year we had it in January.
Well, when you're dealing with parents in their mid-90s or in-laws in their mid-90s, 6 months makes a difference.
For sure.
Really does. If nobody else has any other questions for me, I'll excuse myself. So I appreciate, you guys are all volunteers, and I know that. I appreciate the effort you're putting in, and I'm
Thanks for speaking.
Yeah, thank you. And I wasn't at the previous meeting, but I did see other people kind of echo some other concerns about that too. Like, if you're a young couple, or if you're, elderly or have certain physical challenges that you need accommodations, how do you do that? And there is going to be further litigation because of the 900, limit with the state. But I absolutely agree with your sentiments there.
well. Thank you all for listening today. Appreciate it.
Take care.
Have a good night.
You too.
Any other comments on this topic, or shall we move to merger?
So I have a question.
I had a question too.
Yeah, Eileen, and then Jeff will go.
I just had a question about the usage, like 4133E, that states that no occupancy of the ADU is permitted other than by lease for a minimum of 12 consecutive months. We had talked before about, some people will want to just build these to have parents age in place, or have children and their families come and, switch arrangements or whatever you might have. And this language seems like it would prohibit that,
Or they
because
could get a lease. It doesn't have to be for fair market value, right? Is that the the lease for the 12 months wouldn't have to be for a fair rental value, would it?
No, we don't get involved in how much you rent.
So they could
but-
just have a lease.
Was it our intent that they would have to have a lease?
I think is that what you're referencing, right? The 12
Yeah,
months?
versus occupied by
Right,
family.
right, yeah.
So we had previously kind of discussed that our existing ADU bylaw, when we adopted that one, we got rid of the guest house provision. So our interpretation internally has always been that we make them sign an affidavit that if rented, it is rented for 12 consecutive months. But we don't necessarily mandate that you have to rent it. But that was kind of up for discussion with the board. I don't think we ever got to a consensus about what we wanted to do with that.
And is in that mandate, are they looking for rental for a certain, market rate, not market rate, but like an affordable rate or anything like that?
We got rid of all affordability provisions.
So if it was to be rented for like a nominal amount for a 12-month period, that could technically still qualify and not be in violation of anything?
Oh, absolutely. Whatever a homeowner
So-
wanted to rent it for themselves. But I think to Eileen's point, she's saying that if you had guests staying the summer or you had parents visiting for 2 weeks, can they reside in it without kind of breaking any rules?
Yeah,
Okay, so less than 12 months.
Right.
right.
Oh,
Right,
okay.
right.
But they're not
And
actually
for some
renting it.
people, it might be a little burdensome to have to, maybe they would feel they have to hire an attorney to have a lease made up and so forth.
I agree with you.
So is there some way we can add language that just doesn't prohibit that type of activity for it?
Like an or. Or like
Or
as
like
Al
she
was
said,
said,
it said earlier, if rented.
Right, right.
And then
Just so it leaves the options open. Yeah.
So it was something.
Just another question. If we were to try to permit the XLs, would we then put, obviously we'd have to put some type of a size limit on it,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
right?
Yeah, so I think when we go through that, we can really start to look at, well, is there undersized lots? Do we want them to be able to have an extra large ADU? I mean, like extra large, I mean, they're still not that large. I think the 900 habitable space would probably be sufficient, but of course that's for up discussion. But we could look at, okay, well, our existing ADU bylaw, we didn't allow them on lots smaller than 20,000 square feet. We can look at setbacks, we can regulate a lot of things because it's not linked to the state as long as it's fair and it follows zoning laws, land use laws from Massachusetts. But there's a lot of latitude that we have to create what we need for our community.
Like what would be
as
a
something different.
reasonable percentage of a lot size or?
Yeah.
Because right now it's that they can't be larger than half the size of the,
So it's 900
Main
square feet or half the size of the square footage of the original home, whichever is smaller. So if your home is in 1,800 square feet, you're getting half the size of whatever your current home is. If you're hitting the 1,800 square feet, then you get the 900.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's gonna be a whole another big discussion with lots of details of it.
Yes, yeah. So I think the earlier we started this summer, typically we start zoning conversations in September. I think we'll start them maybe towards the end of June this year.
Yeah, I mean, for someone who has a 3,000 plus square foot home, that could be a 1,500 square foot ADU in the yard. So that's kind of, that's like the size of my own home, so they would get rather large.
Yeah, so I think we could definitely impose restrictions on what we would want to see, and we'll do the same effort we'd hear from the community and craft what we would really want to see. So I just added from discussion, when rented, no occupancy of the ADU is permitted. I have it in red. I'd just like you to have a discussion so we can get guidance on kind of drafting the final language, if that is amenable to the committee, to board, or not.
Yeah, I mean, that was gonna be my question, because I know we got feedback from people who attended the last meeting that there was concerns about the lease arrangements. So as much flexibility we can have in that, the better. I mean, I think we heard that loud and clear from people who came that night to talk.
Anybody else?
Yes.
Oh, go ahead.
So you spoke to the comment made by engineering with respect to the pavement or non-pavement and so forth. There was also a discussion we had previously around requiring a, why am I drawing a blank? Landscape plan. And the logic behind that was that unlike other types of accessory buildings that people can put on their property, an ADU is going to introduce additional habitats, people, additional car traffic. It's going to introduce lights, potentially music, other sounds, and so forth. And by having what I was looking for is having the ability in there for the town to be able to work with the individual applying for the permit to do an ADU, the ability to work with them to use what I'll call greenery, landscaping, to help diffuse any sounds that might now come into the neighborhood, to diffuse any lighting and so forth. You were concerned when you spoke with the town attorney that could be a stumbling point for us because it's a requirement that we don't currently have on building a home. And it may or may not. Right? But my reason for bringing it forward was just as I just stated. I have a personal experience. I have a friend, a couple that an ADU was built next to them, not in Sandwich, another town, and exactly that happened. Their backyard, which they had set up and they sit in, like a lot of homes on the ADU, they put those motion sensor lights. So now when the people are walking around that ADU, the light shines and it shines into their backyard. And then the other thing happens was the reason we sit on the backyard was to listen to the evening, birds and sounds and so forth. And now they hear music and people talking and so forth. It's a balance, right? I mean, that comes with living in neighborhoods and so forth. By allowing for landscaping, we could help diffuse that. And it's interesting because as a planning board, we do that. We've done it in two other applications. One is when we look at cottage communities being converted to condominiums, we've worked with them to see that landscaping is introduced to help diffuse that occurrence of those condominiums. And we also do it when we look at ground-based solar arrays, that we work with them to see that there's some kind of greenery kept on the edges so we can help diffuse both the look and the sounds and so forth. And it doesn't necessarily mean more cost. A lot of times when we've worked with it on the solar array, it simply meant leaving trees and bushes that were already there as opposed to cutting everything out. So it's not an expense necessarily. So I would like to see us have some provision in there that allows the town to work with someone that came in for an ADU on putting in some type of greenery in some way to help diffuse the impact of that ADU now being present in a situation where it wasn't before. Because that ADU is going to present lighting and it's going to prevent sounds. And greenery is a great way to help diffuse that. And I'd like to see us find a way of putting words like that into this thing. I think currently the draft wording we have does not have it in there, is that correct?
It's under 4133F, and I stated applications that include a landscape plan are preferred. So it's ambiguous, so the hope was that we'll request it, but we're not mandating it. So when we go for site plan review, we can request and kind of see. I was thinking if we partnered it with our lighting bylaw and partnered it with, the vegetative, 30% should remain in vegetation, have people start thinking about that and how that would, because 30% of your lot's supposed to remain vegetated under construction projects, that if we could kind of encompass it into those areas, that I could try and get across the intent that we're trying to make sure that we have some safeguards in here. I don't know if that's helpful or it is slightly ambiguous. I just know as we go on with these and we start to see court cases, this is definitely going to evolve and we're definitely going to eventually end up getting more say, I think.
And I was under
we don't want to create.
I was under the impression the last time we talked about the landscaping that if we mandated it, we'd have a problem.
Yes, so the problem is, you know, obviously with town council, this is the first of its kind and there's no case law on it. So it's all speculation. So she was speculating at the time and there was a little bit of a discrepancy between the two because we were mandating a paved parking spot when we've never done that, and then a landscape plan, and she was okay with the paved parking spot but not the landscaping plan. So, you know, it's hard to know at this point is the problem until we start to see case law come out of how we're defining it and start to see when people are submitting their bylaws to the AG's office, what gets accepted, what doesn't get accepted. We're all just in this little bit of a guessing game right now as to what will be accepted.
I like to see something stronger than what you did, but we'll end up with something. I think it's necessary. You know, an outcome that could happen is that we have nothing in here. Some ADUs are built. The situation that I'm familiar with exactly happens. We hear about it through either public hearings in the enterprise or whatever, and we're never able to get an XL ADU passed because people say, no way, look what happened when you did this one. You know, I got lights in my backyard now, I got this music going on and so forth. So that's, you know, I think it could be another, you know, it could be a reason why we want to try to keep a balance here. And as I said, it's not a hypothetical, because I know of an actual case where, and they're going to the town and they're trying to get it addressed. Unfortunately, there's no rules, be it bylaws or other laws and so forth, that are being broken. So it's really just trying to get the neighbor to work with them and so forth. After the fact, which is very hard to do. If you can do it before the fact, it's, as we all know, it's so much easier. So that's all I'm looking to try to do here. You know, if that's the best we can do in wording, then, you know, we'll just have to decide if it's enough or not. I would like to see something stronger than that, as words, around landscape. And again, a landscape plan is nothing more, it can be nothing more than back of an envelope. You know, so, you know, the caution, as I understand it from the attorney, was the state said, don't put anything that causes undue costs or something. It was, you were driving up costs, but it wasn't you couldn't drive up costs. It couldn't be extreme or something. I forget the word you used, and I didn't bring it tonight to read it. So, you know, we're talking about something, like I said, many times, as we've done it on the board, it's just leaving in place a lot of shrubbery and trees and so forth that are already there. So it's not like an expense to put in stuff. And landscape plans that can be hand-drawn. And I understand that no case law, it's new, it could tie us up. And I think the downside, though, if we don't do it, is could also be issues.
Just playing devil's advocate to that, but why wouldn't the person that's being inconvenienced by whatever was built build a fence or put up their own shrubs? If we're not really allowed to place any restrictions.
So what we've done is the ADU introduced, I'll play devil's advocate, give you a comment. So the ADU, which is by right, gets built, and I now have lights shining in my backyard, and I have music, and I have to absorb cost to put up fencing and shrubbery to block it out. Why is that a better solution than asking the individual who's putting the house there, building the ADU? Why isn't it better to ask them at the time of construction, you know, to build something? It's the same reason why we don't allow water to flow off your property. Why do we let erosion occur and then you make the person that's getting the erosion fix it? You know, that's what you're doing. You're asking them to fix the lighting and the sound because it's something somebody else did. I don't see that as a right solution. To me, a right solution is, you know, when you're reviewing a plan, you address all issues, potential issues that are realistic. And you know, this is a realistic issue where an ADU could be built and introducing lights, sounds, additional car traffic, which is disruptive to the character of that neighborhood and what already exists.
Yeah,
and we just got to balance it. So to ask me to say, okay, you got to put the fence up and you got to spend the money.
I'm not disputing the additional car traffic. I'm just asking you to sort of unpack the landscape portion of that, because really right now I could build something within 10 feet of my property line and play my music without building an ADU, and I'm inconveniencing my neighbor, apparently.
You can.
Right, so I don't know that, I just don't feel like that would make it through the Attorney General's office if we were to sort of overly burden our new bylaw.
So the term you used was overly burdened, and that's, well, the words are too, you can't overly burden, and I don't see this as overly burdened. Also, because we don't require it now, doesn't mean as we learn, we shouldn't, because when we write, for instance, in this XL ADU and call it something else, I suspect, one thing we could do is just pick up the current ADU, give it a different title, and introduce it in the fall town meeting, and we're done, because it's already been through everything, and the town voted for it and was positive. But I know we're gonna make changes to it, because we've learned since we did it. That's, it's a learning process. So the fact that people can build homes now, just a home and not an ADU, and put it on the, I live in a neighborhood, this is in the town of Sandwich. We have neighbors that police are there, I won't say constantly, it goes up and down, depending upon time of year, with sound and light. Because we're on 8-acre lots, very small lots, so you're very close. And I know the police get frustrated because they don't want to come. They got more important things to do than they have to come when there's complaints. So the fact that we allow it, there are issues out there. So if we have the opportunity to address it in future bylaws, I think we should address it. And we should it's only ADUs we're addressing now, but maybe we'll address it with something else in the future. So the fact that it's an issue existing and it's not addressed doesn't mean, to me, I think if we have the opportunity to address it in the future, we always should.
How does a landscape plan mitigate noise necessarily of like a loud, you're saying your experience?
It helps diffuse sound and light. So trees, bushes, shrubs, and so forth will help diffuse sound and light when they're placed. And that's why we do it with, we've done it in two, like I said, board previously has done it in two cases that I'm familiar with. One is when we've had cottage communities get converted to condos, and when we do ground-based solar arrays, when we permit those. In both cases, you're permitting in both cases. We work with them to put greenery on the boundary because it blocks some of the sound because you get these fans and so forth that are going on, and it views and any lighting they might have for safety reasons, security and so forth around it. So greenery will help, and it's amazing. You don't have to put very many trees and shrubs and so forth. You can do a great job of diffusing light and sound. It's very effective. That's why you never hear a tree fall in the woods, in the forest. That was a joke.
I just put up what town council's response was. So when I asked for it, I submitted as part of the building permit process. Her response was only if the town requires a landscape plan be submitted for a single family dwelling, which we do not. So that was the language. Again, it's subjective as we don't know what will be approved or not. I'm happy to revise the language if the board wants to take that up. For this one, let me see, landscape plan. So currently it just reads applications that include a landscape plan are preferred. We can, extend that to say, a landscape architect plan should be submitted with your building permit application. It does not require you to hire a landscape architect. Like if we could try and phrase it so that it doesn't seem like it's going to be overly costly, we could give it a shot and see if it gets through. If not, we risk getting the whole bylaw mandated back to us. That's the only thing. But, if we're potentially going for another revision in the fall, it's not the end of the world.
I think what I struggle with on a lot of these points, and it might not be right thinking, is even if they submitted a plan, is there any basis for us to reject what they want to do based on the plan? Because it's a by right ADU. So it's like, it just seems like inviting a lot of discussion and quibbling about something that we couldn't ultimately make a requirement about anyway.
Well, you're basically authorizing town staff to, on behalf of that neighborhood, figure out what the best landscaping is for that area. None of us are landscape architects, but, we'd have some knowledge, each of us in different departments, as to, what could be beneficial, what might not be. It's hard when the abutter is not part of the process. Like it's easier when we have these hearings and you get to hear from both sides, and then you can kind of adjudicate and negotiate what should be done.
Could you put something that require a landscape plan? Well, is this requiring notice to abutters to?
No.
But do we
So
have
I-
any
I just-
right, do we have any right? So,
I mean, what I don't,
So
I guess
can
what
I
I
ju-
don't understand is that if you look under like the CMR, it does give what I think interpret as a lot of flexibility to municipalities to have, as long as you're not unreasonably restricting the creation or rental of an ADU, that's not short-term rental. And then there's additional language that sort of discusses the reasonableness. So I feel like, are we putting in our bylaw too much broad stretch for people to comply? But Massachusetts regulation does actually seem to allow us to make some restrictions.
It's pretty much the same answer. We don't know what they're going to allow and not allow with this. All they came out was this model bylaw with these rules that are vague. And until we start to see them go through. So I erred on the side of caution when I drafted it, with the comments that I made to council on certain things that I knew we would want to see. And then she's just using her best estimate. But what's so interesting is every land use attorney you meet has a different opinion. And when the building commissioner goes to the Southern Eastern Massachusetts Board of Building Commissioners every month, he comes back with completely different instances of what attorneys there are telling them that the ADU bylaw will do for communities versus what the planning experts are telling versus. So it's so convoluted right now that I really just based it off as close as I could to a model bylaw that we got from the state that really followed without pushing the envelope on would this or would this not pass.
So what's the worst case scenario? If it gets rejected, we still have to allow the by right, so you're not any worse for the where, right?
Well, it's just from what Jeff had referenced, so it makes it difficult. So if people go under the state regulations and then you're still working to become in compliance with these regulations, then if we add additional, say we see that we can add landscaping plans and other regulations to them, but then they're retroactive, like we're coming to a homeowner halfway through the process saying, you now have additional steps that you have to.
And I wonder if it's better to put more in at the beginning and then kind of whittle it back versus the opposite. So like if we put in landscaping plans and it goes in, that's kind of what we proposed initially. And if it gets rejected, well, it gets rejected for the landscaping plans, and then you resubmit it without the landscaping plan or in a different way. But
it still takes time. This
Yeah.
all takes time, and any grants I apply for this summer, I won't get.
it's the,
So there's
so that's the other.
there's that downfall too with other state grants that we get.
is it possible, so say the bylaws are silent on that, but there's language in the state law about it and then understandings evolve over time and we can just point to the state law? Do we have to repeat those things in our bylaw to make it enforceable?
Yes, it depends. It really depends on what portion of the state bylaw it's in. Is it something we have to adopt? Is it something that's enforced? So that's a very hard question to actually answer because it really is dependent on what we're talking about. Another way we could do it is we can create requirements within our site plan review process and mandate those.
Is part of the concern on the part of the town council is our exposure because we don't require it on single?
Yeah, so the way the state worded it, and then just going through, I've attended 3 of their sessions now on how it's supposed to be interpreted. They wanted to interpret it as anywhere that you have a single family dwelling that's by right in your district, this can accompany it. So anything that we mandate for the single family dwelling currently, we can mandate for the ADU, like the 30% vegetated state that we have, like our lighting bylaws. Any of those bylaws still apply, but that we can't regulate anything in addition to our current single family dwelling. That's how they explained it to us. And then just like between the state office, like the EOHLC and the Attorney General's office, I mean, we've had different statements coming out of both of those entities that jointly wrote it. So
Do you know if any other towns are doing any kind of landscaping provisions or any other, have you talked to any other planners about their bylaws and compared them?
Yeah, there's two trains of thought. There's the thought of we're going to do a bylaw that suits our community and see if we can fight it, and then there's the ones that say we're just going to comply and continuously update it as we start to get more latitude. When you're fighting it, you're putting yourself at risk for grants. I mean, that's really just the scary part for us, because it's not just the planning office, it's also the town manager's office, it's the engineering department's office, the DPW. They get a lot of grants every year, and if you have to tick a box that says you don't comply with all state requirements.
Is there a way to make it not retroactive? Can you say, going forward, that's just under that protected class, kind of you can't modify?
That's for every single zoning article that we ever do. They're all retroactive.
What about like legal non-conforming? Like, could you kind of qualify existing ADUs under the protected class as legally non-conforming, so then you don't have to go back? And because, like, you know what I mean? Like, if you're retroactive to what? Is it just the ones that are like actively?
No, so that's, you can't use non-conformities that way. So like when you're voting it at May town meeting, you're conforming under a certain bylaw, and that bylaw, it's known, that's where the duly advertised public hearing is. Like, it's on the property owner, homeowner, developer to understand the rules and regulations of the town. So
when you say retroactive, I'm just trying to figure out.
So say in August, like when you're in August and we get the green light from the Attorney General's office that we're good with this, or they didn't put in for a landscape plan, anything that we did from May 1st onwards would now need a landscape plan, because it goes back to the date the legislative body votes it in.
So when you say when you did May 1st onward, meaning like that's in process, or they'd have to go back and redo something? I'm just wondering, like, where does that line get drawn as to when somebody has to comply with?
If they're within that time frame. So once town meeting votes it, so I'm just using May 1st as an example, it's in effect, but it's not in effect. So I mean, you have to wait for the Attorney General's office to tell you that it's lawful. Once they do that, it goes back to that May 1st date. So any permits issued within that time period, yes, like building permits issued within that time period, then has to.
So if anything that's actively ongoing.
Yeah, it's not like something from 2 years ago that we're going to reopen.
Right,
it's like a 3-month period.
How big of an impact, I think this was kind of what I was trying to figure out, like how big of an impact could any subsequent changes have, just to kind of bulk it up as we go.
Yeah, and then I guess it's just like if it's denied at the Attorney General's level, and then we're going through again, I mean, that's just another whole other can of worms to, I wouldn't even be able to give you a clear answer tonight on how we would deal with that. For a denial, while people are still applying under the current state regulations and then getting pushed out again, like it's just,
okay.
that would be a mess.
So it sounds like the lean is to go towards a clean bill or a clean bylaw that'll get passed, and then kind of revisit it as things start to happen and seeing what latitude we might have, and we'll just have to kind of deal with some of those interim period permits. So maybe if we know it's getting presented, that would just, because you're communicating with people when they apply now anyway, so it would just kind of continue that conversation. And I don't think, and unless somebody feels differently, I don't think that any changes we make would be monumental. It sounds like they would be more like a tweak, like, like a landscaping plan it's not supposed to be unduly burdensome. So the idea would be is shouldn't unduly burden whoever's permit's ongoing either.
And I think we would, if it remains somewhere, in this vicinity of language, when we do our site plan review, we would be asking for it, and we could maybe require it under our site plan review process. Like we have that process, the internal, that we require for applicants that want to come in for commercial establishments and other items. I guess I do just get nervous that if it's not passed, how we deal with that and how we deal with our summer grants.
Yeah, what the impact's gonna be.
Yeah, I certainly don't feel strong enough about it to risk not just getting into the
Neither do I.
Yeah, and you could add it, and so if somebody has an ongoing permit and they have to add some shrubbery, I don't think it would be.
But we can accomplish that through the site plan
and
review
we can
process.
maybe
If we get a lot of pushback, we can't mandate it because it's not
Right, but
we
we
can
can
have
encourage
conversations,
it.
we can encourage it,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
can encourage we can try to utilize the bylaws that we have and talk to them about, well, you gotta keep 30% lot coverage or lot vegetation. Should you think about, where you're gonna construct this and how that would impact your neighbors and keeping as much greenery, trees around that area as possible. So I mean, those conversations can occur, but to Jeff's point, it's just we can't really enforce it without having it within the bylaw.
So this is gonna come before us again in a final, so we're gonna do all this
This is your
now.
final, yeah, so I do kind of need a,
I just want to point this out and open to others' opinions about it, but when you say when rented, the intent usually behind when makes, it sort of has a connotation that it's going to happen, so I'm just wondering about changing that. So that it sounds more like so it sounds more like as an option, not when rented, meaning it has to be rented.
While
Rented. Maybe
Yeah,
I'm
I
being too
think-
much of a
yeah.
stickler about it, but
No, I think that
I
makes
think
sense,
just down the road, let's just say in 5 years, when rented sounds like the expectation is it's going to be rented.
yeah, I think the expectation is that they should be rented and then just gives a little bit of latitude here and there. The purpose of the bylaw is to have more rental units
Right.
as
Yes,
possible.
absolutely.
So I'm nervous about if rented, because I think that's going too far in the other direction of, oh, you really don't have to rent this.
I
I think it should be rented at some point. They should not be sitting vacant.
Yeah.
But I think if there's an instance where it's not rented for a year and grandparents come to visit, we're not going to have an issue with that.
Yeah, and I
think
was
the intent really is it should be rented at some point. Like, when you
mostly
construct
thinking
them.
about older parents moving in and really not.
Oh, and we would consider that rented. Like, I mean, $1 a month, I mean, we see that all the time, and people ask us that questions, and we say, well, we're not asking how much money they're giving you, but you should have some type of an agreement with them.
I see.
Okay, so we just went full circle on that a little bit.
Yeah. Because now there's an agreement that
Yeah.
we were talking about how we didn't necessarily want people, I mean, I could understand you just write a piece of paper, you can have this for the calendar year for $1 a month.
You don't
but-
ask for a copy of the lease,
Right.
but you are signing an affidavit that, when you're renting it, it's by lease. We don't ask for that, but it's something that you're saying you do, so if someone's staying in it long-term, I mean, it should be rented. That's the purpose.
Yeah.
For whatever amount of money, that's up to the homeowner, whether it's their parents and it's $1 or it's
Yes.
whatever, and it's on the back of the napkin.
So it could just be a quick little note, it doesn't have to be a formal lease agreement.
No, yeah,
They don't even need to turn over anything.
No.
Yeah.
The only time we would start getting involved is like if we got complaints, we would investigate. So if there was excessive noise coming from it, we would look at how's it being rented? Is it on any of the short-term rental websites? Like what's going on at the property? That's when we would start to look.
Well, that was a really good clarification, because until that, I wasn't thinking there was an expectation that it be rented. I thought it was the
I mean, I know
owner's choice.
the purpose of
Yeah.
the legislation is to promote like affordable rentals to people and increase the amount of housing.
Yeah,
be
so
rented,
I mean, I wouldn't keep it as a guest house in perpetuity. It's supposed to be rented.
Right.
Yeah. It's just like any of those gaps, I want to make sure that there's like a little bit of latitude for someone to be able to utilize it. If they're having trouble finding a renter, if they had a problem with a renter, there's so many different scenarios that can happen. We don't want to hamstring too much, but it should be rented for the majority of its life.
So for the second ADU 4134 bylaw, there's going to be a motion whether or not to bring that forward to the select, then to bring it at town meeting warrant. Now, just to kind of revisit our last conversation on that, we were going to do the public hearing to see how we felt, whether or not it was time to bring it forward. Unfortunately, I wasn't here for that, so kind of turning to everybody. That's what I recall from our conversation. Want to see where everybody is with that.
And the only participants here were speaking in favor of having that option.
The second
The
ADU.
second ADU. No one came to speak in opposition.
There were, what, 2 people that spoke about being in favor of it, so it wasn't a big crowd that was here in favor of it.
And then the sections, I don't have the book, the sections 1330 and 4130 shall apply for the second ADU. What was 1330?
1330 is the special permit criteria. It references noise, nuisance, hazard, congestion,
Okay.
detrimental impacts to the neighborhood. And then section 4130 is all of
This
this
one.
accessory dwelling unit
Okay.
bylaw. So they still have to fall under all the rules and regulations of the current accessory dwelling unit bylaw.
Yeah.
And then they have to prove that they're not creating nuisance, noise, hazard, congestion, or a detrimental impact to the neighborhood
Yeah.
to you for approving it.
But that's special permit, so it's still
Yes.
gonna come before planning board.
It would
it
come
can be
before the
approved.
planning board, and it just, as I always say, the way the statute is written on special permits, they shall usually be granted. It's a high burden to deny a special permit, so they should usually be granted and they're conditioned. So just so you know, for this decision making, it's not that you can see them come before you and start to deny them.
One thing I'd add to that is, in balance to that, risk is what you're saying, there's a risk there because it shall, unlike a ZBA decision. And all the special permits I've been involved in, the individual coming seeking one has always worked with this board to address any concerns that people have had. So it's not, we got to mitigate a little bit about how big a risk it is. The fact that it's a special permit creates that environment that people know they have to go before and have discussion and work with you and so forth. And like I say, we've done it for ground-based solar arrays. People always work with us. They've always worked with us on the cottage communities and so forth. So I understand the risk because it's a shall versus the other side. But I had to say, for the ones I've been involved in, if we voiced a concern or if someone in the public voiced a concern, they've always worked with them.
But what kind of concerns could we voice? Because if I understand it correctly, it would mimic the bylaw, the by right bylaw. So if we, for example, Jeff, wanted to do landscaping for a second ADU, we would be restricted.
No, you could do it.
We could do, so so where does our discretion end then with the second?
So the second, they don't have any rules or regulations around. So we're kind of in the same standpoint. What council said to me was, the AG hasn't weighed in on what this special permit looks like for a second, but I don't see any reason why you couldn't institute a lot of the criteria that you currently have, like owner occupancy. I don't know, can we create, at that point then you're creating but two, that there would be owner occupancy on site. Landscaping, there's no reason we can't do landscaping. You can do any reasonable conditions, but just like all of these other requirements are still in effect. Like, so when we talk about one off-street parking, that's still in effect. When we talk about it cannot be transferred or separated in ownership, that's still in effect. So when it references 4130, it's just all those requirements are still there, but then you can add additional ones as conditions as part of the special permit.
Doesn't that makes the shall feel like a may? Because it feels like you could arbitrarily almost add any condition and do away with the shall then. So it's kind of, so like, for example, as written, if we wanted to do landscaping plan and a paved driveway and different things, we could add as many conditions as we wanted. So it almost feels like you could bypass the shall if you were so inclined.
You kind of have to think of it slightly differently. So you have to think that your first one's by right and your second one's by approval. And by advocating for yourself to get this discretionary permit, which is what it is, you have to take on this set of conditions. They cannot be overly unreasonable. So you can't, say the neighbor wants, a veneer wall, and you're going to pay for that. Certain screen, like there's, you get into lawsuits with things like this. Like you can't unreasonably regulate the special permit, but you can definitely regulate things that aren't listed here.
So a couple questions on that. One is like, what is unreasonable given the landscape of the protected class? What is that going to be based on, one? And two, if that's the case, then why did we go through all the effort to do our special permit bylaw when it could have been simply written with that broad discretion? Like, why did we add in all those extra conditions kind of built within the body of the bylaw?
Because when it's listed in the body of the bylaw, it's not a discretionary condition, it's a zoning bylaw. It's enforceable. The town legislative body voted on it. When it's a condition in the special permit, it's only you guys that voted on it. It can be contested at court.
It can be contested in
Yes,
court, so it
yeah,
does.
so
kind of
they're
open-
completely different.
So it opens up, it could open up a can of worms from an unreasonableness standard, because, I mean, it sounds like we don't know what unreasonable is. So are they basing that
Yeah.
standard based on the protected class standard or against another standard?
So because the Attorney General hasn't weighed in, we're assuming it's on our current special permit and all of the case law on special permits about what's unreasonable and what isn't on a case-to-case basis.
Yeah.
So we're falling back to that as how we've always done it in Massachusetts, regarding special permits and the types of conditions we can include in special permits, because the by right is by right and we're not touching it.
Okay.
It's if you want the second one, there's a different set of criteria in order to get a second one.
And kind of to piggyback on that, say for example, because I was happy with the bylaw that we had. We spent a lot of time on it, and it was very thoughtful, and I did like it. And I'm just wondering, say for example, with a second ADU, if we were to condition it and work starting June, and was talking about maybe making a more robust second ADU bylaw, if we were to require that the homeowner, in order to have a second ADU, has to live there, would that actually would that be enforceable because you can't do that with the by right?
That was the question that we hadn't, I asked that question to council, the one I just had on the screen. Hers was, in her opinion, she believes we can require owner occupancy of the second on the property, but that the Attorney General's office has not weighed in.
Oh, so you can require that they live in, as a primary residence, the actual second ADU. So that might, is that what I'm hearing?
Well, I phrased it as owner occupancy of the property. I
Of the
didn't reference which
property.
dwelling unit they were staying in.
Yeah.
And hers was just, in my opinion, it's not been tested,
Yeah.
so.
Because I wonder if you require, maybe even, I think it'd be harder to challenge if you require them to maintain the second ADU as a primary residence, because that's that's not real, that would be separate and aside from anything to do with the other two, but, yeah, I mean, I'm toggling with that discretionary piece. I think it's too soon. I think there's a lot of things, and I think we had a really good bylaw, and I feel like we're just kind of throwing it out when we could be applying it to a second ADU and seeing where the first by right ADU takes us and how people feel with those being built. I just think it's a lot at once.
And I just think from the feedback I've received, the concern from the community was not so much about the second, but just about the size.
About the size.
Yeah, there wasn't many. I know there was a couple here that I missed that mentioned that they would like to see the opportunity of the second. But just from fielding calls in the planning office, and then from people talking to me after I gave that talk at the Center for Active Living, a lot of them were just much more concerned with the size of one rather than.
And that's the other thing too, with discretion. I think that we get into an issue because if for one person we allow somebody, we'd have to narrowly tailor every decision. Because, for example, if you allow a 1,500 square foot ADU, we would have to say maybe we did this because it was on a larger lot, because there was landscaping, because then somebody could come up and then challenge our discretion where why wouldn't we allow it for another person? Would we kind of set precedent on the board that way?
You wouldn't be able to change the size of the ADU. That's the definition. So even with the second one, the definition of an ADU still stands. But yes, I mean, in some cases, you may institute a fence in some cases. In another case, you may not institute a fence and say you want arborvitaes. But so staff drafts that. We know what a defensible decision is. So I mean, I wouldn't worry too much about that. I mean, it's just as long as we all work together to talk about. I mean, we draft special permits all the time. So
So from a discretionary standpoint, why can we not regulate size, but we can regulate landscaping? Like, where
because
does that lie?
It's specifically referenced in
In
the bylaw.
Oh, in
So the bylaw's law.
okay.
So this is when we're looking at accessory dwelling unit. This falls under the title accessory dwelling unit. It's a second one. You still have to meet the definitions of what that is. So when you're thinking about conditions, it's site specific.
Okay.
So it doesn't have to be blanket for each one. It really is site specific. And, you know, there is case law on previous special permits about, you know, what's reasonable, what's not reasonable. You know, obviously as we play out the ADU, it's a little bit different because we haven't gone through this before, but.
Isn't the second one, so isn't the second one just basically what used to be our first one?
That was my question to council was our existing ADU bylaw, do you think we could mandate these items as part of the special permit process? The answer was, in my opinion, yes, but the AG's office hasn't weighed in.
Yeah.
So
But just conceptually, like basically we'd just be keeping what we always had, which allowed them to have the bigger size and the conditions, the way you've always done it.
no, we can't do size. The size, we've changed our ADU bylaw, that's what we're doing, we're changing it with a new definition. We have to follow that. You're not allowed in a special permit change the size of a zoning bylaw.
And it would have to be, when rented, it would have to be for 12 consecutive months,
Yeah.
the second ADU. So everything on there.
Everything, so say, what it says at the bottom, sections 1330 and 4130 apply. 4130 is the proposed zoning bylaw. You can do conditions on top of existing. You can't change existing or laws.
Okay, and similar conditions like you would have considered in the past.
Yes, like
right?
there were certain ones we can't institute on the by right, but we could on a second, but they still have to follow the bylaws.
That makes sense. And then the third case that we hope to get to is like the XL,
Yeah,
which would look a lot like what we just used to do. Gotcha.
yeah. I'm sorry, it gets so confusing. It's so hard to keep it
So then
logical.
so the second ADU, I'm just trying to find, so if people have been voicing the larger size, the second ADU doesn't do anything for that. It doesn't even address that.
Yeah, bar just the fact we haven't got a great sampling of the full community.
Right,
We've only had a very small,
Right.
you know, pool of people that have discussed it. So I don't like to speak in too much general terms when we haven't heard from everyone, but
From the ones that have
from the
spoken.
ones that have spoke up, it was more size that was concerning than getting another one on their property.
And so coming up with a third one that has its own name could serve a lot of people.
Yeah, and potentially, I mean, then you would end up having two anyways, because you would have your by right ADU, and then you could have a larger one unless you restricted that within the bylaw. We'd have to look at it. I would have to see if that's legal. So you potentially could do a second if we went forward with an XL one this summer.
So
So it's really up to you on what direction you want to go, which I know it's tough right now.
Well, I'm just thinking, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm just thinking, like, given that the state is so ambiguous with, like, they don't seem like they have figured out exactly how they want it to look. I mean, would it be more prudent to just say, okay, let's, you know, the first is by right, so let's just tackle that. And then let's see how that all rolls out. Let's see what other towns start to do and how their bylaws work, or maybe perhaps don't work with the AG's office. And then somewhere down the road, then introduce the second ADUs. Because if we ran into an issue where we allow the second ADU now, then you're giving people something and then taking it away, as opposed to adding, you know, people always want something more. They don't want something taken away. Would that be a more prudent approach to just be, you know, kind of a conservative approach of just taking it in steps almost, you know, rather than trying to do everything now where there are so many ambiguities right now? And maybe we could learn some things from, you know, like I said, other towns, things that worked for them, things that didn't work, what the AG allowed them to do, and it would, you know, we'd get ideas that way. That's just my thought.
I'm in favor of adding or talking about adding a second ADU at a later date with some conditions on it, just so that we have kind of an idea and seeing kind of how everything plays out, and then with the consideration of doing an XL, because, you know, if people are taking issue with the size, I mean, how much impact would this particular bylaw as written have? You I don't know.
I don't know. I guess my feeling was after we talked about it the last time, the second ADU, because we get to control what that looks like, it has to come before us. I felt more comfortable going ahead with that now. I mean, I don't know what waiting does for us. Because it sounds like a lot of this is going to be tested out legally. And God knows how long that's going to take.
Well, I think we can address the XL and, so to Eileen's point, you're bringing an XL ADU versus removing a second one and, maybe replacing it. And yeah, just seeing where the first one by right takes us, because it's a big change.
Well, might there be towns that are going to dispute the 900 habitable versus total? And will the state maybe even end up in the near future changing the 900 to habitable?
Potentially.
So, they'd end up with a better end product at that point.
Yeah.
Anyway, so you could gear the bylaw around that it's habitable space.
Yeah, and if they do that, then the by right one would be allowed, and then we didn't have 2 ADU bylaws on the books before this. So essentially, like, why would we do that now if in the event that does end up kind of working itself out, then we're back to where we were originally. We did have a lot of people that were utilizing it.
Oh, it was heavily
Yeah.
utilized,
Yeah.
ever since we did that.
So if we do that, if we do that, then if somebody comes before us and they want to build a second ADU, there's no vehicle for them to do that right now if we go that route, correct? We'd have to wait until we create a new, whatever this structure is for this extra large one.
There never was,
Right. They'd have to wait until we created that,
if we were to create it, yeah.
as opposed to if we just approve the second one now, they could go ahead and put up the second ADU.
Well, we never had a second one. Like, why? It's not like you're expanding, you're just allowing 2 of the same thing that's undersized, really, from feedback. So what's the point? We didn't have it before.
I don't know, I guess I thought that, my feeling was it just gives us more flexibility and it gives people in town some flexibility too, if they want to do it. Maybe it never happened.
I feel like the discretion, though, doesn't give you as much flexibility. I know it might feel like it allows you to cater it, a bit, but not to the extent where I think it's really that discretionary. It allows you to add some shrubbery or, things like that, but to, how much discretion do you have? It doesn't sound like you have a broad.
I mean, you're restricted in saying no. So, I mean, you could get
Right.
the one that comes before you, and you have the whole neighborhood coming out saying they're currently renting both properties and it's a nightmare there. Please don't let them have the next one. And you would have to just condition it to try and protect them, but you would still be saying yes.
Right.
For the most part. I mean, it's hard because it's always case specific and there's always different things, but that's why I guess I was a little bit, just being careful that we understood what a special permit is and that, that the statute says it shall usually be granted, and then you do conditions on it. They're not often upheld in court if a board denies one and it's appealed. But I mean, there's cases where it has been. It's very case specific, so I don't like making broad sweeping statements, but it's just something for the board to think of.
Leanne, just to be sure, the opt-in is completely opt-in. So if we wanted this XL or whatever, we aren't required to have that opt-in as in addition. Okay, correct.
Yep.
So any more comments on that? Can we do motions for the zoning ADU one bylaws, and then we'll kind of move completely to merger?
Yeah, absolutely.
Does
So
anybody
there's
wanna
2
add
for that.
anything?
I just added the red of what we kind of talked about. So C would read at least 1 off-street parking space in conformance with the town's driveway regulations. In addition to that, required for the principal single-family dwelling is required for each ADU, unless the ADU is located within 0.5 miles from a transit station. Surfaces shall be paved or stabilized and non-erosive as otherwise approved by the building commissioner. All parking for ADUs should be off-street. So that's how it would newly read with Sam's language. And then further down, it was when rented. I know we had a discussion, I don't know if the board's still comfortable with that, and then you should make a decision about the applications that include a landscape plan or preferred.
I'm fine with that.
Because this is what the board will be voting on, just like omitting this section 4134, that's a separate vote. But this would be how it reads. You've seen this has been in your packet. Change of the table of contents, the accessory uses, and then this would be how it would read. It actually might be helpful if you voted on the second ADU first, because I got to strike it from the table of contents for the next one. Just thinking procedurally. It'll just change it and you should see it before you vote on it. That looks like.
So before we make a motion, do you want to go down and see where everybody
I think
stands
we should
on
straw
it?
man.
Straw man, yeah. I guess.
On the 4134 second ADU,
Yeah,
yeah, I think we need to table that, and workshop it. I don't think it's ready for prime time. I'm with you.
Yeah, I guess I'm okay with going that route, in light of the fact that we've got this other option that we can explore and will give us a lot more flexibility. So I'm okay with that.
We should move it forward. We heard at the last public hearing, people were interested in having it.
I'm gonna say that we should table it, and so that we can develop it more. And I think because my opinion is really based on the fact that it is sort of a cookie cutter size wise, and that's not what really seems to be in line with what the public wants. So I think our attention could be focused elsewhere.
I want to wait for similar reasons, and I feel like if someone pressed me, like, why did you not provide that option to the public, I feel comfortable saying there's just so many unknowns that we're trying to learn more so that we can appropriately bring this to our town.
So we're talking about the permitting of the second. Okay, yeah, I'm a no.
okay. Shall we take a motion on that one? It's right here.
Okay.
Oh, you have yours.
So, I, Melissa Dugan, motion.
Just before we take the vote, well, the public hearing is still open because we're doing merger next, but there's no one here. So we're just procedurally, we're thinking
So
about.
closing the, okay.
Or maybe just take the straw vote and know where you're at for when we
Gotcha.
do. So we should close the public hearing after merger
Yeah,
and then.
yeah, thank you, yeah. Okay,
Thanks, Maureen.
yeah, thanks, Maureen. Okay, so then we did that.
Take note of that.
Yeah. And then I think for the first one, we'll take a straw on if we approve of the red lines that were made.
And just so you know, so if it ends up getting voted down, permitting a second ADU would obviously disappear in the use table. Enforcement would move to 4134. Just so you know what the changes are.
Okay. I was happy with the red line changes that you made in there, including the when, leaving the landscaping plan is preferred. It just notes that we've thought about it. It's not required, and it hopefully won't ignore any, limits and whatnot. So, yeah, I'm okay bringing that forward.
Could I just ask Leanne, so is that language in E, when rented, is that strong enough language so that it does not prohibit someone from having a family member stay there as opposed to renting?
I believe so, and I think that the conversations that we had, the intent's clear, so it basically goes into our zoning interpretation file. Whenever we know that a board's made a decision on something, we write it up and we put it in an interpretation file, so if the situation arises down the line, so we have ones in there from our building commissioners from decades ago, if they've done an enforcement notice or something, just so we know what the intent was of the bylaw. It's very handy when it comes from the planning board as you're creating it, so that we don't have to second guess it later down the road. But it'd be a similar thing that we put in what the intent of when rented means.
Can we put a comma after rented?
bothering me also.
Well, because then it does really, to me, just look at a little.
Sure.
So do you want to make a comment?
So, why are we motioning to recommend the proposed amendment if none of us are,
Oh, we just have to reword it.
okay,
Yeah.
so.
To not recommend, would she say, so when we do motion, she's just asking, because the way it's worded is that it's recommended. We would just say motions to not recommend.
Oh, yeah, exactly, yeah. Or you could do it in the favor, you could say motion to recommend, and then whoever said no
Oh,
would be a denial.
yeah.
Because you would need a majority to pass.
Oh, I see, so say it like that.
So you could still
and
say
then
it in
do
the positive and then vote no.
All right, but if I'm saying that I make a motion to recommend, but I'm not, I don't.
You're making a motion, but that's not your vote, you just make a
Okay.
motion.
Okay, so are we at that point?
So no, because we have the public hearing open, we're doing
Okay.
a straw, so then we're gonna take this after the public hearing
Okay.
closes.
So you need a
So we
motion
were
to
just
close.
talking about this first one with the red line, just to make sure everybody was okay with the way that it was drafted with the
Okay.
red line edits, and I'm fine with it as drafted. So I
I'm
think, okay.
I'm fine.
I'm a no. We don't require a landscape plan.
I'm fine with it.
Yes.
So we'll go to merger.
We'll go to merger. This one is quick. Let's see. Okay, so basically just one slide on this. Lots held in common ownership that were undersized, used to merge for zoning purposes, pretty much rendered them unbuildable for single-family home use. But now we are allowed through state law and actually required to update our zoning bylaws so that lots that are held in common ownership that conform to the existing requirements at the time they were created, and they're not less than 10,000 square feet with 75 feet of frontage, that are located in a single-family residential district, they can be essentially unmerged for zoning purposes, and you could build a single-family home not to exceed 185,000 square feet, shall have at least 3 bedrooms, and it cannot be used as a seasonal home or a short-term rental. So that's the language from the state. So it basically gives residents a lot more latitude. If they owned a lot next to their home in common ownership, we could potentially see an unmerger of some of those lots.
But it has to have frontage
It has to have 75
on
feet of
a
frontage.
recognized road.
Correct.
Okay.
Public or private, yeah.
I don't think I have any comments.
You can just go to the actual bylaw so you can see it. It's written. So this is non-conforming lots. This is our current section. And then I added 2560, which is adjacent lots held in common ownership. And it just explains what was referenced on the slide.
Any comments, questions?
If you're ready to close the public hearing, then we can move on to votes.
I'll take a motion to close the public hearing.
I make a motion to close the public hearing.
I second the motion to close the public hearing.
All in favor? Aye. Okay, and then we'll move through our motions.
Okay. I feel like I should do
Second ADU first.
that one first, yeah, okay. I guess I'm just still struggling with me motioning to recommend the proposed amendment when I don't, so I can.
You can vote to recommend it and then vote no. You're not stating your feeling on it,
Okay.
you're just making a motion.
Great. I, Melissa Dugan, motion to recommend the proposed amendment to Article 4, Section 4134, and the table of contents for the purpose of allowing a second accessory dwelling unit and forward the language to the Board of Selectmen for inclusion in the town meeting warrant.
Ian McManus, second the motion.
All right, I'll do a roll call. I, Jennifer Rising, no, vote no.
I, Melissa Dugan, vote no.
I, Ann McManus, vote no.
I, Jeffrey Picard, vote yes.
I, Nicole Willett, vote no.
Jeannie Burgess, vote no.
I, Eileen Stars, vote no.
Okay, we'll move to this one.
Second one. I'm gonna strike the excluding section 4134 because as you pointed out, the table of contents that pushed up, so, okay. I, Melissa Dugan, motion to recommend the proposed amendment to Article 4, Section 4130, the definition section and the table of contents for accessory dwelling units for the purpose of complying with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Affordable Homes Act of 2024, and forward the language to the Board of Selectmen for inclusion in the town meeting warrant.
I, Ann McManus, second the motion.
Roll call. I, Jennifer Rising, yes, vote yes.
Melissa Dugan, yes.
Ann McManus, yes.
Jeffrey Picard, no.
I, Nicole Willett, vote yes.
Jeannie Burgess, yes.
Eileen Stars, yes.
And then I, Melissa Dugan, motion to recommend the proposed amendment to Article 2, Section 2550, non-conforming lots, and the table of contents for the purpose of complying with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Affordable Homes Act of 2024, and forward the language to the Board of Selectmen for inclusion in the town meeting warrant.
I, Ann McManus, second the motion.
Roll call. Jennifer Rising, yes.
Melissa Dugan, yes.
Ann McManus, yes.
Jeffrey Picard, yes.
Nicole Willett, yes.
Jeannie Burgess, yes.
Eileen Stars, yes.
Great, so that's all set. There's no new business to discuss. Few agenda items under board discussion. The first is future planning efforts.
And I'll go quick because I know we're getting late into the night, but I just wanted to update the board on some planning efforts that we've undertaken in the planning/community development office now. So we have contracted with Barrett Planning Group to look at our village core and potentially reestablish some mixed-use zoning in there. So the core prior to zoning, basically its inception was encouraged with commercial residential uses, a little bit more heavily dense than what is existing. In the 90s. That was all rezoned where mixed use is no longer allowed. So as we've been going through the RFP process for the town hall annex, we've been looking at uses and what is and is not allowed there. So as part of grant funding from the county, we were able to have some regional housing services shared with multiple towns on Cape Cod. Barrett Planning Group was the consultant of choice that won that award. So we have been working with Alexis at Barrett Planning Group to start looking at it. So it's in its fairly inception stages, just to see kind of a history of the land use of the area. It's some of it's in the floodplain, a lot of it's historic preservation. So kind of how do we maybe have a little bit more mixed use in there while still being very conservative with density, with historic preservation, and with resilient coastal design, with being in the floodplain. So it's something that we will bring up probably sometime this summer. And in conjunction with that, we've been asked by management to start looking at zoning for the Route 130 corridor. As some of you were on the board back in 2019 when we underwent this effort with the Cape Cod Commission through district technical local assistant grant funds. We hired an architecture firm out of Rhode Island, Union Studio, that put on public workshops and surveys to talk about density and talk about what form we would like to see it in if we were to redevelop the area. So we're building on all of that work to look at what we could potentially do when wastewater comes online and what zoning changes might the community like in that area when that comes, just so that we can control the development and it doesn't control us when we get wastewater. And we will build off that study. So we received $40,000 this year from the same funding source, District Technical Local Assistant Grant Funding, or DELTA for short. So the Cape Cod Commission will be working with us on that. I've asked them that once we have kind of a zoning a very baseline draft model for the village district that they include that when we do all of our public outreach. So this will be, at least a year-long effort. It's nothing that I anticipate would go before town meeting anytime soon, but something to start thinking about and talking about, and whether or not it's a good idea, what we really want to preserve, what the community wants to see, what areas we might want to see growth in, what areas we might not want to see growth in. So it's all really up for discussion, and it's all in its infancy stages, but I just thought the board should kind of know some of the efforts that we're looking at right now.
Thanks, that sounds exciting.
The second discussion item is request for comment, file 24-02 for 28 and 30 Salt Marsh Road, special permit, 28 Salt Marsh LLC to raise this current structure and rebuild a slightly larger structure.
Yeah, so basically it's within the floodplain, so they need to file for floodplain relief for construction over 301 square feet. And then it's also non-conforming, so they needed some non-conforming relief. They're increasing the footprint of the structure by over 30%, which triggers that relief, and they're exacerbating some non-conforming setbacks. They still meet the setbacks of their lot creation date, so it doesn't require variances, but they are intensifying on one side and lessening on the other.
Any comments to bring forward from any members?
They don't seem to be proposing any grade changes. Erosion control is always an issue in that area, so it's something that would make its way into a decision.
Second request for comment item, number 25-03, 25 Manor Drive special permit, applicant nurse. It was for 5 dogs for a kennel permit.
Correct, so it's a personal kennel license. They got a new dog this year. They previously had 4, and they are filing for their kennel license with the town clerk's office. They were notified that they need a special permit to have more than 4 dogs. So that will be going before the Board of Appeals in not their next meeting, but the one after. I don't know if there's something in specific that you need to know about that, but it's basically just an additional dog to the household.
Any comments? All right, no comments to bring forward. Last agenda item is other matters not reasonably anticipated. I wasn't here at the last meeting, so I don't know if Steve was with us. Were you at the last? Yes. Oh, you were? Oh, okay, because I was going to welcome you, so welcome again. Any other matters not reasonably anticipated?
I just wanted to say thank you to a couple of people who had reached out, and in case the board didn't know, I had to take some time off to take care of my mom. So I missed a few meetings, and I really appreciate your kind words, Maureen, especially. So thank you for understanding my absence over the past period of time. Getting back to work and everything now.
It's good to have you back.
Thanks.
Welcome back.
It's good. We got live-in care, so that seems to be working out well, and very unpredictable. Yeah. She's stubborn as hell. So she does not. She does not want to go anywhere but her home, and I get it. I'm doing everything I can to keep her there.
Oh, yes.
We'll take a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to adjourn.
I second the motion.
All in favor? Aye.
So I think we'll call the meeting to order here at 6:30. I'm surprised we don't see Charlie yet, but we'll carry on. Approval of prior meeting minutes, that'll be quick because I did not prepare them in time for tonight. I meant to do it this weekend and completely slipped my mind. Weekend got away from me, so we'll have that for the next meeting. Public comment. There are massive amounts of public that are here. Let's say there was none. Ongoing business. So Sam, could you provide, if you have one, an update for the, oh, wait a minute. I did forget to say one thing. Tonight's meeting is being streamed on sandwichtv.org and broadcast on local channel 9. The meeting will be available on their YouTube channel and website tomorrow. The overhead mic is hot. The person recording the meeting has texted me and says we're all good to go. Service road shared use path, update. Do you have?
Not to put me in the spotlight or anything.
Speak into the microphone.
Right. For Service Road, I have been involved in some discussions where punch list items are being developed and for spring work coming up. Largely having to do with landscaping and other odds and ends. There's a few lingering erosion spots that the contractor is going to take care of. And it is looking favorable, but that project will be substantially wrapped up this spring. So I've not heard any formal discussions yet about a ribbon cut, anything like that. There may be at some point.
I think at last check, the state agreed that they would do one, but I don't think we decided on a date.
So do they have any idea when, that'll, be, I know like I said, they gotta do the punch list, but I mean, are they, because honestly, I'm out there, I don't see them working out there. So I mean, if they got a punch list and stuff or everything to do this, I mean, are they looking to have it sometime in the spring, the summer,
I've heard, yeah, because it'll happen soon. Work crew will mobilize sooner than later. I don't know the exact.
No, I mean, it's just that, I mean, I know, because it was kind of like, said, put you on the spot, I mean, and you say that, you can only say what you know, and then, but it just seems it's the same thing, and then they've had opportunities to be out there to do it, I'm sure, but, they'd want to finish it up and be able to, move on to another.
It's been winter and it hasn't been growing season, and so there's a lot of landscaping that needs to be finished. I think they want to be efficient with their mobilization, so they want to get out and get as large of a chunk of the work done in one effort as possible. That's what I understand.
Yeah.
So they need to wait for more favorable growing conditions and whatnot.
So,
There was still frost on the ground last week.
do you know what kind of, landscaping or whatever that they're looking to be working on? I mean, are they planting more trees or whatever, they're replacing trees, is that pretty much what the landscaping?
I'm not sure of the tree count between Mass DOT and Lawrence Lynch. I'll just leave it at that. At the least, there is road shoulder work.
Oh, that kind of stuff, okay.
Yeah, I don't know if you've noticed, but it's.
Yeah, and I know they're working on that towards the end of last year or whatever, and some of that's filled in.
At least just for ground stabilization. But then also there's some aesthetics along with it. So, there's some finishing up that needs to be done. Mass DOT is aware of it. Lawrence Lynch is aware of it. They just think they want to schedule the work in an efficient manner.
Is it any particular, I mean, is it along the whole route, or is there like a certain area that they're looking to need to concentrate on?
Well, there's a couple of erosion spots that have been persistent, and there's plans in the works to get that squared away. So those are isolated spots. Those are like across from Spalding. Just tying that up. Most of it is complete. It's just a little bit that, in our view, looks like something that has a little bit of a question mark on it. So they're just going to do belt and suspenders to make sure it's buttoned up as well as possible, so that when we take it on the town side, it isn't an issue for us. And then things like landscaping, I think, are more end to end. With restoring the road shoulders, getting grass to grow.
Yeah.
Can't say there's going to be something done at every spot along the way, but I think that the intent of everybody that I've talked to that's involved, they all want it to look good and be a nice project.
Yeah, thanks.
Anybody have other questions? Thank you, Sam, for that. Service road canal connection update.
So the biggest action item that's been happening on that one that I'm aware of is VHB has been working on traffic engineering and in preparation for working with Mass DOT in their traffic section. So they've been starting their crash data analysis and traffic count work. And we're anticipating there being some involved discussions with Mass DOT, particularly regarding Route 6A. And one of the developments that comes out of that is then the potential for some design development and some refinements to what they had envisioned as their concept right now on Route 6A as they talk to Mass DOT and their engineers. And then that relates back to the timing of the public forum, because I would recommend that we continue to have regular public forums to engage the public and inform anyone who's interested about what we're doing, and provide a channel for people to talk to us and give us their input. But with the timing of everything right now, it's looking like instead of a spring forum, it might make more sense to go to a summer or possibly early fall forum. In talking with Steve Rhodes of VHB, he was saying that we could do a spring, but forum if we really wanted to. But in his view, it thinks it probably makes more sense to wait and do it in summer when we're further along in discussions with Mass DOT. And that really won't happen until they get farther along in their traffic engineering analysis.
Okay.
So we have a little leeway on this particular phase right now. Sorry to keep going here, but because of the timing with the grant funds that we have through Mass Trails. So we have an extended period of this particular grant that goes out an extra fiscal year.
Right.
So we don't have the deadline hanging over us like we have had in years past. And that's part of what drove the public forum being in the spring. Right. So having that freedom, I think there's a little bit of a benefit as well, maybe having a large population here in the summertime and early fall.
Sure.
To draw from.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, that if we were to have a forum by summer or fall, we would actually have further developed design renderings.
At least basis for design.
Yeah, okay.
And so they'd have a more solid understanding of.
So something more tangible that we can talk about with people. Okay. That sounds reasonable to me. Anybody have a comment on that? Okay. I think we should shoot for that. Would we time it with our meetings like we've done before, or would we?
I thought that worked pretty well.
So we're potentially looking at August 18th or second. Where's my meeting schedule? That would be more helpful. Yeah, I have it here. Yes. So August 18th or September 15th, potentially? Okay. If we have to do it a different day, we do. That's fine. But those would be ideal. Okay. Anybody have questions on that? Did you have more on that or no?
No, that was about it.
Everybody good? And then I didn't put a crosswalks item on the agenda specifically this week or this month because I thought we would just focus on the current grant applications. There's a lot of work that could grow out of those grant applications, so I thought that was the best place to put our initial emphasis. In case anybody was wondering why the agenda was structured that way. So if you could speak to anything we've heard on the grants that are outlined in the agenda, the shared streets, the vulnerable road users, the RFB. Have we heard anything back on any of those?
Not officially regarding the grants specifically. Quaker and Katuitt continues to progress. Just had another meeting today with Stantec is doing the engineering on this one. We're looking to extend the sidewalk from
along Katuitt Road, from Quaker Meeting House Road to Farmersville. As part of this, if funding will allow. So there's just some details to nail down with that. Today was a good day to review the drainage out there. So took advantage of that, talked with the engineers a bit. And that is continuing to progress. So they have some direction now, and they'll be preparing preliminary designs. I don't know if it'll be ready for the next meeting, but probably by at least the following meeting. Okay, that'd be great to see.
On vulnerable road users, I haven't heard anything back there on that. That's a larger Cape-wide program, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
As is the free RFB program, the next item down. At least on the RFB, the state was looking for additional speed data and traffic count data. The county had provided that, and that was the last that I heard on it. So the state had all the information that they needed. And, just waiting to hear back.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Questions on any of that? Bike racks.
I actually have progress on this one.
All right, give it to us.
Let's see, so at 100 Route 6A, we are working with Brian Schlegel, Director of Facilities, to identify locations. I believe there are actually, I know there are bike racks that are at DPW.
Okay.
It's just a matter of pinpointing the location of where they may go.
Okay.
Getting the approvals and having them coordinate the installation.
Okay.
Center for Active Living, that, from what I understand, those have been ordered. We're working with that facility there and the Recreation Department. And they have been ordered, and DPW will help coordinate the installation of those when they arrive. So those are going to be surface mounted, so they're similar appearance for that up top, above grade. They just get anchored into the concrete. So,
Do you know what type?
we're sticking with the hitch. Tried and true. Provides good, stable surface to lean the frame against and lock up.
And the hitches were what are sitting at DPW for 106A as well?
I believe so, yeah.
Related to that, the Joint Transportation Committee meeting that I attended on Friday, one of the things that we had struggled with the Center for Active Living is that the county grant program that had existed previously was not funded for this year. The Joint Transportation Committee did recommend a single year of funding I believe next fiscal year. So if we want to start thinking about upgrading existing ones, like perhaps at the schools or elsewhere, or need a new fix-it station somewhere, just be thinking about that, because there will be an opportunity, I think, provided that the MPO approves the recommendation, that there'll be an opportunity to get our bike racks, back in the pipeline. So it was only a single year that was funded, and these things get decided year to year. So, and we'll have to compete against other fellow Cape Towns for the funding, but I think there'll be enough that everybody will be happy. So,
I'm just curious, are any going at the parking lot that's for the bike path that's off of near the golf? Were there any being looked at to be potentially put there?
I'm not sure about that.
I thought Paul had said at one time that there would be, that it was part of that project too.
Just curious, like, is that from, just to help me out with the perspective on that, right?
Yeah.
So if we're going to a
bicycling facility, we're gonna park the bike and leave it. Fix-it station.
Or a fix-it station. I mean, I think that's
Fix
more
the
of a
station, I
thing.
think would be the key thing.
Yeah. But there's, even at Maple Swamp, we have bike racks. People that are hanging out there at the picnic pavilion. Sure, yeah. Yep, lean a bike. Yeah. Yep. But I think what was discussed with Paul previously was a fix-it station, because we had wanted one to be purchased for that. And he recommended we hold off because it was part of that project already, if I remember correctly. I'd have to go back to the fix-it station. Okay.
Plus, you never know, they might want to park their bike there and go look for some road golf balls. Because I know I've had enough.
That's something we're trying to discourage. But I think a fix-it station either at that parking lot or what we had considered previously was at Maple Swamp.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because Maple Swamp you couldn't though, right?
You couldn't, right.
But here you could.
But you could at where there's the crossing there. Is it?
Oh, could you put, you could put it, because that's on town land, I guess, on that side of.
Well, if the state were to be installing it as part of the bike path project, it could be installed along the bike path, I think.
Which location are we talking about?
Maple Swamp.
Yeah, we couldn't do it with the Maple Swamp. Because that was.
I think DNR.
Right.
They're concerned about that. So contrary to some of the limitations regarding that property in terms of materials and whatnot. But anyway, we'd love to see one somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just changed for no reason at all. I probably should keep my glasses on. Okay, anything else on bike racks? That's it. Okay. New business, I'll just say that a couple things that have come to my attention. The Sandwich Recreation Kids Mountain Bike Program spring registration is open. The program is supposed to run from the last week of April on Wednesdays through the first week of June. I unfortunately this time around cannot volunteer. It breaks my heart, but I have a work conflict. But there's plenty of volunteers from our friends at Menma that I know, so we're looking forward to that. In case you're interested, the Shining Sea Bikeway is having or the Falmouth Bike Committee is having a Shining Sea Bikeway reopening celebration May 4th from 1 to 3 with a rain date of May 10th. They sent around a flyer. Some of you may have been on that mailing. Their part of the path has been closed while I believe Eversource, one of the utilities, has been upgrading underground, what's the word I'm looking for? Connections under the path. So they had to close down some of the path. There's been a detour there. It's supposed to be wrapping up this month. So they are having that ceremony in case you're interested in attending. And then finally, construction has begun on the Yarmouth to Barnstable portion of the Cape Cod Rail Trail. There's been substantial clearing along where the path is supposed to go south of the highway, wiping out some access to some mountain bike trails, but that was expected. So obviously once the path is there, the access will be restored. So, so that path is migrating towards Sandwich at the pace that it migrates. But that portion includes a bridge over Willow Street and will connect to Mary Dunn Road. And then there's still another portion from Mary Dunn Road to our town line that's still being planned. But it's coming. So those were the new business items I had. Did anybody have anything?
Is there any talk about the rest of the Barnstable?
I haven't seen anything lately. I know it's being worked on. The plan is being worked on, the design. But I haven't seen any news recently about it. Next time we talk to Steve Rhodes, I'm sure he could probably give us an update.
Because that would be the last section, right?
Yes. Well, and we would have a gap to close ourselves. Very small gap.
Oh, Sandwich Chase from Chase Road to the town line.
Yeah. Last half mile. So, anybody have anything else they wanted to bring up under new business? No? Our next meeting would be April 28th. because of Patriots Day the previous week, so we're pushing to the 4th week instead of the 3rd. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
All right,
Second.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I'll go to my beef stew.
Good evening. I would like to bring to order the March 19th, 2025 meeting of the Sandwich Conservation Commission. My name is James Andrea. Present tonight are
Jeremy Shea,
Kimberly Walsh.
Jonathan Klein,
Bernice Waller.
Tyler Greengrove.
Linda Romano with my mouthful.
Can I do my motion now?
Sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'd like to make a motion to appoint Linda Romano as a voting member tonight.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Please note, this meeting is being recorded live and streaming on Sandwich Community Television. Live broadcast can be viewed by visiting sandwichcommunitytv.org or on Government Live Stream, or you can view later on Government On Demand. You can also view on local Comcast Channel 9. I would like to remind everyone of our meeting format. For all hearings, the applicant will be allowed adequate time to present their project to the commission. Upon completion of presentation, the commission will be allowed to question the applicant, ensue commission discussion, and ask for staff comment and input. Upon completion of the commission's discussion, I will read, summarize for the record, any public comment received by the staff prior to the meeting. I will announce public comment to the audience where any interested parties are to raise their hand. I will ask you to come up front. Please speak clearly into the microphone, which is now above us, stating your name, address, and affiliation for the record. 3 minutes will be allowed. All speakers are to address the commission, not applicants or audience members. When your 3 minutes are up, I will ask you to take your seat. A reminder, all public comment is not a Q&A forum. Upon closure of public comment, the applicant may add additional information, comment to the commissioners. The commissioners will deliberate among staff. Finally, I want to remind everyone that this commission is comprised of your neighbors volunteering our valuable time to help protect our town's natural resources to the best of our abilities. Our job is to uphold the provisions set forth by the Massachusetts Wetland Protection Act, as well as the Town of Sandwich Wetland Bylaws, Chapter 7. We appreciate your understanding. I would like to make a change to the agenda and bring other business to the front quickly and swiftly.
Hi, good evening. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Board. Dave DeCondron, Department of Natural Resources Director. With me is Chief Burke from the Fire Department. And tonight we're just going to give you a brief outline of some things we'd like to do up at Upper Shawm Dam. So if you don't know where the Upper Shawm Dam is the map here. There are two dams that our department manages. There's one at the lower dam. You wouldn't even realize that it is a dam. It's along the grist mill, and this upper dam where we have another fish ladder. If you want to go to the next slide, Alex. As part of the maintenance of the dam, we're required to remove vegetation every year. This dam was a rebuild back in 2008. It was a 100-year-old dam that was built over cedar posts with earth over it. And it had so many trees on it that it just deteriorated. This new one has a concrete spine underneath with earth over it, but we're still required to remove vegetation. If you have too many roots in the system through capillary action, it breaks the dam down. We don't want to have happen what happened a number of years ago. So I've been talking to Chief Burke about the possibility of having some firefighter training this year to help manage the vegetation. I'm going to let Chief Burke talk about what that would be like.
Thank you, Dave. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for giving me your time. One of the things we noticed with the fire department is wildland fires are on the increase, and I have 75% of my staff has turned over in the last 10 years. So I have 3/4 of my staff that are inexperienced with wildland firefighting. So talking with Dave, one of the things we were looking to do is be able to start training them in a controlled environment on tools, portable pumps. We thought this was an excellent opportunity with a very small area for our newer people to get some training, collaborate with DNR, also address a need that he had moving forward. So I approached him on it. We've scouted out the area. There's actually 3 sections that are fenced in. We have 3 groups that'll be training, so each group gets a section. I promise I won't burn the fence. We're only going to burn in that particular area, and it's more hand tools that they're going to be practicing with. We have drip torches. The Department of Conservation and Recreation Forest Fire Group will be leading the training and will be there. So it's a fairly small area, but it gives us an opportunity to have some training, and it also opens the door for future collaboration, which I think is important. If there's other areas of town that we can do some training in, whether it's chainsaws or small controlled or prescribed burns like this, we would like to pursue that, but we feel this is the first opportunity. We'll see how it goes, and it does provide our staff with some very valuable exposure.
The only other thing I'd like to add is a number of years ago, our department wrote a fire plan for the conservation lands that are known as Maple Swamp and Discovery Hill. So there is a map. I didn't bring it tonight because it wasn't, I wanted to make it short. I know you got a big meeting, but maybe in the future I could bring it forward and show it to you. And, that's what Chief Burke's talking about, is collaborating in the future. We did have the opportunity back in 2019 to actually do a prescribed burn of some of that property. And unfortunately with COVID, we couldn't get all the permits. The last permit we need to get sat on someone's desk because they were working at home. And we had 3 days that we could get the burn in. And of course it was windy all 3 days. But I'd be more than happy to come back at some time with Chief Burke and do a full presentation of what that looks like and all the work that we've done. Because it's very important work. I know Jeremy knows because you just had a forum on it. But it's extremely important as far as the life of the forest when you get into the forested areas to do these prescribed burns. And this is just a quick start.
And as part of that, I'll mention the county has a wildfire protection plan that was done in 2012 that has not been updated. There is grant money coming forward to have that. That's an overlay to the town's plan. So obviously you will be able to review that. And I think where we're at now, where we were 15 years ago, are completely different in terms of wildfire management, what we're seeing. And I think we want to be prepared. And like I said to Dave, I think this is a really great opportunity to start some collaborative training, I think, moving forward. So I'd appreciate your support with this.
I'm psyched about this project. This has been something I've been writing about for years. I guess the county one I'm psyched out for too. I think my one question is the county, I know they were talking about AmeriCorps coming in, which is great. We love AmeriCorps. Would you be open to citizens? Because I think for me, and 1637, we had the citizens burn committee that went out into the woods. Mm-hmm. And I think I love the department getting trained, but when it comes to the vastness of Sandwich and the forests, having citizen engagement, I think would be really important. Your department can only do so much. Yep. I saw him knocking down a fire on Farmersville on Saturday. Yep. I drove by the guy burning brush, and I was like, ooh, it's windy. And then 3 hours later, drove back, it's like, all right, well, that happened. So I would love to attend. So I don't know if that's something that you'd be open to, or certainly as your first, maybe you're like, we just want the department. And maybe some going down the road.
And I think that speaks to the collaboration. So it's not necessarily DNR restricted collaboration. You folks represent the conservation of the community. So I have no issue with observers and people watching what we're going to be doing. More eyes is better. I will mention we're not expecting a ton of smoke from this. So you won't be driving down Route 130 and see columns of smoke coming up from this particular training burn. We're going to be doing notifications to the community and we're planning on doing this the 25th. Monday we'll start our notifications out for that. But yeah, I agree with you. More the merrier in terms of, and if you're bored and you have time, if you go to YouTube, the 1945 fire that started in Bourne and went right through Lakewood Hills, Chase Road, they made a stop there. DCR does a great video, and you can see the East Sandwich Grange Hall being the command post for that, and it shows how quickly fire can spread.
Started by Nazis. The POWs on the base.
POWs, yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't the Enterprise going to send a reporter to
Yes.
Chronicle?
Yep, and I think they want to see, just to be educated on hand tools and other methods of wildland firefighting. It's a completely different set of gear that our members wear when they go out there. The tools are different, the strategies are different. We have drones now that can do overflights with thermography so we can see hotspots. So it gives all of the elements of our department the opportunity to train in an area that they don't get a lot of training in. So I'm looking forward to it.
So how does the process work, like logistically? Is there an NOI process or what is the approval or is this?
So there's, depending on the size, you get into NOIs if we get to bigger land masses. This is small enough where we don't need to, DEP is aware.
They're just informing us that this is happening?
Yep.
Yeah. And there will be no chemical retardants or anything that are used?
Nope.
Because you're gonna fight the fire with dirt?
We're gonna try to put it out with hand tools. Now, we'll have the portable pump set up, which will draft out of the pond. That's more to practice extracting water, drafting water from there. But as you can see, this area is small enough where we should not need water if need be. But if we do, our 6x6 Polaris has 200 gallons. It'll have a hose line. The goal is not to use water, I'll put it to you that way. But we will wet it down when we're done anyways, just to make sure, but there'll be no foam, there'll be nothing chemically based.
And thank you for putting up the herring run. So the timing on this is perfect because this is before the herrings start to make their migration up there, which is typically the end of April.
Say the date again that you're aiming for?
March 25th, Tuesday, yep. Rain or shine. If it's really raining, we probably will put it off, but again, with hand tool practice, we want to make sure we utilize the time we have.
Do you know the like general time of day?
So 3 rotations starting at 9, 10:30, and 12. So pick your poison. In between that time period, there'll be 3 working groups. So if you're anywhere between 9 and 1 o'clock, you'll see some action there.
Perfect, I'll be there.
Well, thank you for bringing it to us. And,
And like Dave said, we'll keep you updated as we move forward. I feel it's a good first step.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you for coming in.
Thank you, folks.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Back to the agenda as it follows. Opening a new file, RDA file number SCC 2025D-03 Lakewood Farms Trust, care of Cape and Islands Engineering Incorporated, has filed a request for determination of applicability. Proposed deck replacement on a single-family dwelling, 21 Great Hill Road, Sandwich, Mass, located at map 19, lot 11.
Good evening.
She's just gonna grab an easel for your plan. I didn't realize we didn't grab it because we have the big TV now. You can go ahead.
Okay. Before you tonight, representing the clients, Lakewood Farms Trust at 21 Great Hill Road. I have a fairly straightforward project. We're replacing existing deteriorated deck and footings. It'll be replaced in the same location with no expansion. Construction access and staging will be in the upland. And we're going to use the existing driveway to access the site. Work limit will be established prior to any work, and work will be done by hand, apart from using a small mini excavator to dig out the undersized footings underneath the deck and digging small, they're just going to be sonotubes, and all work will be within previously permitted and previously disturbed areas. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
I'd like to open up to staff comments.
So I believe this was something that Chuck, who was the conservation agent prior to me during that interim time, he had started and done site visits, recommended, I believe he recommended an RDA filing at that time. Were you in NHESP habitat at all?
So we did file with NHESP, and we believe that we are exempt.
Okay. Do we have a copy of that letter, just that, or email correspondence are showing the exemption? I had a note on here for an HESP letter needed, but I wasn't sure.
Yes, so we have not heard back from them.
Okay.
And I can either give you what we have, I have paper copies right here, or I'll forward it to you.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. And then I believe I spoke with one of the folks working on that project who had some questions about erosion control measures. I forgot his name, he just came to the front counter. And we were talking about silt fence or wattle. You don't have to use both. And he was talking about using silt fencing a wattle might be easier given the grade of the pond and how steep it is over there, but whichever works best for you guys, just to limit any erosion going into the pond. And then I would recommend a -3 determination with standard conditions along with that, if you guys are okay with that as well.
I'd like to open up to public comment. Closing public comment and open it up to the board. Anyone have any questions?
Are you using real wood? Or are you using plastic wood?
For the decking?
Yeah.
I didn't really ask what the material is for the decking, but the real bigger issue is that it's deteriorated and the footings are just too small. And so that to meet current building code standards, we're gonna have to beef up the footings.
So you'll have some soil disturbance?
Yeah, and it's not like a full foundation, it's just a sonotube.
Yep.
So.
Jenna, is it okay if we condition like a silt sock rather than a wall?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think that's similar to a wattle in function, right?
Yeah, I just think it does.
Yeah, yeah, we can do that.
Like they have, the combination is actually the best, because if you just do a silt fence, what happens is it goes through. If you have the combination, it not only demarcates the line of limit of work above, and then if for some reason it's like trash and things go up there. So I would say the combination that they have is actually the best management practice.
And we can condition that to say it. Our conditions say one or the other, but I've been with other commissions that have both.
Yeah.
And it's an entrenched wattle, and then the silt fence goes under the wattle, and then it's staked through the wattle and the silt fence cradle. So it's like super, super secure.
Yeah, it has to flip either way. If the fence flips the other way, so things can't get in, flips the other way if it can retain soil.
Yeah. And it only has to go on the down gradient edge. The erosion control doesn't have to go around the entire work limit. That's what the high-vis fencing is for. Then the erosion control is just the edge near the pond where
I think we should condition it with something that will do better than the straw wattle because of the seriousness of the grade. Yeah. There's a lot of lines on that.
We're thinking both.
Yeah.
Silt sock. Is that what you
Silt
call it?
sock. Yeah. Silt fence.
Silt sock and fence.
We want to be sure to get that letter from Natural Heritage because it is in the.
Yeah, we're gonna have to continue. We need the letter before we could approve. If that's all right. Or the correspondence of an exemption. Yeah.
They didn't reply back, but I think I'll be at the next hearing.
Okay.
I did see your letter, so yeah.
All right. Is that all good? We'll do.
Vegetation wise, certainly those footings, I'm guessing they kind of look like high bush blueberries to me. Are you expecting to remove?
I was not. So I have these photos here, and we can like go in there and like almost auger out and extract. There's no reason to dig a massive hole in there or anything like that. I think that we can fairly surgically dig up footing in there.
Awesome.
We can do a continuance and just wait for that letter, okay? But the next one's 4-3.
4-2.
4-2, I'm sorry. I wrote it down. Okay. My apologies. Is it? Okay. 4-2, 6 o'clock, all right?
You want me to,
Well, we're just gonna make a motion real quick.
Motion to continue file number RDA, or file number SCC 2025D-03 Liquid Farms Trust, care of Cape and Islands Engineering, Inc., 21 Great Hill Road, Sandwich, Mass. 02537 to the April 2nd meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yeah. So once we have that correspondence with that. Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'd like to open RDA file number SCC 2025D-04, Patricia Wyman, care of Down Cape Engineering, filed a request for determination for a proposed deck replacement of a single-family dwelling at 15 Captain Greaves Road, Sandwich, Mass., located at map 64, parcel 17.
Good evening, Chair, members of the Commission. Dan Ojala. I'm a land surveyor and civil engineer with Down Cape Engineering in Yarmouthport, and helping the Wymans out with another modest tweak of their deck behind the home here. It's an area of homes all around. There's a small BVW tongue that comes in from the west. And so that is the resource area that affects the site. We're looking at a site that you had recently approved some work on. And what they'd like to do, the deck has become deteriorated that was there. And so they'd just like to replace that with a new deck. It's an opportunity to drop a set of stairs inside the deck footprint, so they're doing that. But it's a rather straightforward matter. It's no closer to the wetland than what's there. There's some patio on the first floor, but we're going to put pervious pavers there instead, so we thought that that would be good. So it's the patio and steps would be replaced, the landscape steps to be used for walkout access, the proposed patio to be constructed out of a pervious material, and the existing decks and stairs are to be replaced generally within the existing footprint, no closer to the wetland. We are squaring it off just a tiny bit, but it's further back from the wetland where that's happening, and seemed to us to be a matter that could come in as an RDA, wherein, it's within your buffer, but doesn't affect it significantly, so need not be filed as a notice of intent. There's a flood zone, so there's a technical coastal bank at the flood zone line, but of course we're not really impacting that with open decks and patios, so no impact to the ability of that bank to contain floodwaters. Coastal flood zones generally aren't affected by, de minimis amounts of changes in fill, and here there's practically zero. So we'll propose a work limit line around the site. We'll revegetate. It's all happening within existing lawn and landscaped area, and again, it's almost exactly the footprint that it is now. So we thought it reasonable to bring it as an RDA. There is a narrative that we went through, and I think the picture is perhaps one of the easier to look at, that we're just replacing that deck, squaring it off where that little bump out is, and you can see the wood is kind of deteriorated. That's the real reason for us to rebuild that and make it safe. I'd be glad to answer any questions if you have them.
Thank you. I'd like to open up to staff comment.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. I've been to the site a couple times. We issued, I want to say it was a COC recently for that, the home. I believe they had an addition built on there. The proposed work is within lawn and previously altered areas. The wetland delineation is further back, and this obviously doesn't really affect the resource area itself. It's in buffer. It is inland subject to coastal storm flowage, but just so you know, for any future projects, a wetland line is good for 3 years. That line was previously issued a COC on, and we've been using the same line right along. I don't think the resource area has moved much, but if they want to do any future projects after this deck, I would recommend getting that line remarked, just because it's been a little while. But for the sake of this project and where it stands now, I have no problem recommending, I would say, a -2 determination, just because it's not just within the buffer zone, it's within the flood as well. But I can still add conditions in there too, same as a -3. It would just be a -2 because 3 is buffer zone only. And no appendix Gs data sheets were submitted for the BVW line, so we can't certify that it's a line, but that's just a condition that's added in there. And then when new projects happen or whatever, when they get the line redone, if they want to submit data sheets at that time, they can.
I think that's very reasonable.
And that's all I got.
I'd like to open it to public comment. Right, closing public comment and open it up to the board. Does anyone have any questions regarding this project? Straightforward with a -2. It was -2, right? You said -3 there real quick.
Yeah, sorry, -2 for this one. Yeah.
Yep. Good. All right. Sally, you want to get in there? Come on.
For
yeah, you're just issuing a -2 determination for the file.
Got it. I'd like to issue a -2 determination for RDA file.
Motion.
To approve RDA file number SCC 2025D04, Patricia Wynn,
Special and standard conditions.
With special and standard conditions.
As discussed.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Moved. Thank you.
Thank you for your time very much.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion to continue DEP file number SE 66-2046 Norbert Sack, care of Cape and Islands Engineering, filed notice of intent for proposed reconstruction of existing retaining walls, decks, walkway, and stairs on a single-family dwelling at 137 North Shore Boulevard, Sandwich, Mass., located at map 70, parcel 113. We have an email correspondence to the conservation agent, Jenna Silva. Jenna, can we request a continuance on this project until April 2nd, 2025? The NHESP comment letter has not been issued yet. Thank you, Chuck of Cape and Islands Engineering.
Could we actually change that to the 16th, as I have several other hearings on that Wednesday?
Motion to continue to the April 16th.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Perfect.
Thank you very much. Have a good night.
You too.
All right, on to continued filings. I'd like to open DEP file number SE 66-2033, Peter Wild, care of Stantec Consulting Services. File notice of intent to relocate existing stockade fence, removal of trees, removal and upland relocation of approximately 94 cubic yards of wood chips, subject to land court ruling on proposed easement relocation at 46 and 64 Rose Road, East Sandwich, map 69, parcels 24 and 25. How are we doing?
Very good, thank you. Peter Durning.
What's your last name, Peter?
Durning, D-U-R-N-I-N-G, from the law firm Beryl Dana LLP for Idlewild Acres LLC.
And I'm Michelle Simino from Stantec Consulting.
Hi.
Hello.
Great. So, Mr. Commissioner, thank you. This is a continued hearing. I know we were here a few times in late November, December, and then we had to have a few continuances. But I wanted to check in with the commission as to where they believe they are in the process in terms of questions or comments. I think we've had a few public sessions and we've had some back and forth on the project, but I wasn't sure where the commission had questions or where it wants to go on the hearing.
Absolutely, thank you. I'd like to open up to staff comments.
I don't have any new comment. I can just kind of reiterate everything we've gone over. Wetland line does not need to be certified by the town because we didn't receive any data forms, which is fine. There was some concern about the pond that's closest to the proposed easement relocation. The pond was not created by the applicant, and its construction may have predated the Wetlands Protection Act in 1972, so that pond has been there right along. And that it's my understanding that this notice of intent is in response to land court order, and everything that I've reviewed seems to, this appears to be necessary to comply with that land court order. I think we've gone over everything a couple times now, so I think that covers all my concerns since we opened it.
I'd like to open up to public comment. Come on up. If you want to just come up, the microphone's right here. If you just want to state your name and address.
Mary McCarthy at 23 North Shore Boulevard Extension. Thank you. Hello, Commission. Thank you for letting me speak tonight. I'm one of the residents that's represented by Bill Henchy, but he can't be here tonight. And I know he was here a couple months ago, and I think he gave you all a really good background on the history down there and the land court. So I don't want to get into all of that. I think you're pretty well informed about that. I do want to just reiterate, kind of like if I had to summarize in one sentence, not in legal terms, but like our residents, we just ask that when you make a decision that you consider all of the open orders, from history, from way back. There were violations, and we don't want those to get forgot about. I know it was a long time ago. A lot of you weren't here, and we just want to make sure that this notice of intent complies with what those orders were before and all the work that was done. So there's that. And then I also have two questions for you. And this is going to the land court ruling. So in the notice of intent by Peter Wild and the attorneys, it talks about moving the easement's being moved, the paper road, right? The land court has to move that from where it is to a different place. And it specifically says for purposes of a walking path. However, in the land court ruling, it's moving the way of a 50-foot easement and all the permissions that go along with a way. So not necessarily limited to walking. It could be cars, it could be trucks, it could be, ambulances, things like that. Now, I know that there'd be new, permits needed if we were in fact wanting to build a road, and I don't know that that would ever happen, but it's really important to us that we maintain that right. So my question for you would be, that 50-foot area that he's proposing to move the easement to, does that comply with guidelines for a 50-foot way? We don't necessarily oppose what he's trying to do. We just want to ensure that it's in our rights and also within the town's guidelines and what's right for the Conservation Commission. So that would be one question. The second question is in regards to, in the notice of intent, the removal of some wood chips along North Shore Boulevard extension and where that fence is. And I would ask, if you look at the land court thing, it doesn't just say remove wood chips. It says to return that area in the way back to its original grading. And I think they even talk about it a berm. There was there was a lot of filling in that space, more than just some wood chips. And I have pictures, I don't know if those are useful, they're kind of hard to see, of what it was, before that fence went up, after the whole EPA thing, not before the cranberry bog. And I can even send digital photos if that's helpful, but I wanted to ask how you would determine what that original grade is. And I know you're not the land court. However, I don't want to be back here because we didn't meet the verdict of the land court. And I think that also overlaps with some of the orders that happened before of regrading that area because of flood and everything else. So I just wanted to ask, and you consider how you determine where returning goes to.
Yeah, thank you.
So,
I don't think we can answer your question. We'll be deliberating among the board for sure, and hopefully we answer your question with that.
Okay, so you'll think about that. All right,
Thank
you very much for your time.
Is there any other public comment? All right, closing public comment and opening it up to the board.
Should we
Was
discuss
anyone on
those
the board
questions?
before?
Because I think
We've all been updated about the case numerous times, so we're all educated.
We
on
definitely have done a
what the
few
process
sidewalks
is.
too, you know
So
what I
we
mean?
know, I think we're not lacking in the historic data of this project. There is removal of wood chips being proposed as part of the application. Can you just remind us what the land court order requested about the wood chip area in particular, or the grade?
I do. Well, he's looking that up. I can tell the commission that we're removing approximately 93 cubic yards of fill associated with the wood chip. That's the berm. And so that's inland subject to coastal storm flowage. So that will be removed. Elevation, the flood zone elevation there is 14 across the whole land. So
And then it will be, it's proposed to be being maintained or to be taken back to elevation 14 through the removal of the wood chips.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was that area when we were up there.
Yeah,
to the
I
right,
remember
yeah.
that. Yeah. I think that it's, it was good for us to understand that pond was developed, has historically been there, was part of the bog system. And, is definitely something that the commission feels the need to protect and route the road around. So I feel like this application makes a lot of sense in that way, that you're looking to kind of plan that out. And so I think that what we feel like would be appropriate is that we would approve the project with the condition that that no work would proceed unless the necessary relief from the land court is received. Does that feel appropriate?
Yeah, land court approved, yeah, and any new work would
And no-
require a full NOI,
Any new work,
future work.
additional work
Yeah.
outside of this area as well would need to be come through with an approval.
So just one quick question to follow up, because I believe there is certain work in terms of removal of obstructions in the right-of-way that could be performed now that doesn't require the resolution of the second land court action. So I don't know if you phrased it as you did, that no work to proceed until the issuance of the second land court decision. I don't know if that is appropriate.
Staff, do you have any comment on that?
Thinking. Yeah, we just wouldn't, we would have to word the condition to state, no work. Unless, we want to make sure whatever work is being proposed to be done complies with that land court order.
Correct.
So wording, because we don't want anything else going on in that, under that permit. Like, this permit is here to address.
I would say, because this permit is a notice of intent to address a land court order. So the work with the land court order would have to be, cannot start until the land court decides. If there's work that's outside of that land court order, which is what I think you're saying, that could start now? Is that what you're saying?
So there are two different land court actions to reference. There is one that is concluded and an order issued, and that is the bulk of the work that is proposed here, removing obstructions in the way. But for the relocation of the easement, that also requires land court approval. So there was a subsequent action filed to relocate the easement, the roadway, from its trajectory through the pond to extend, for lack of a better term, more or less straight across. And the work that is detailed in the notice of intent that would be contingent upon the approval of the second land court is the extension of the stockade fence across the remainder of the way that would otherwise block the paper street.
Yeah.
We're not going to block the paper street unless and until the new land court decision issues saying, yes, the location of the easement is now going to be above where that stockade fence is. But for the portion of the work, absent the extension of new fencing, that other work can proceed now. It's the extension of the fence over the paper street portion that is contingent upon the issuance of a subsequent land court decision relocating.
I wonder if we could condition it, just two separate conditions.
Yeah.
This condition addresses the land court order that's already been satisfied.
Correct.
You can proceed with this work. You can't do the
extension of the
extension
stockade fence.
until you receive,
That land
and
court
we can reference the specific land court numbers in that condition. I mean, we can condition it as specific as we need to,
Absolutely, yeah.
if that works for everyone.
No,
That's what we contemplated.
yeah.
And I think on that site visit, looking at the location of that stockade fence, seemingly it does satisfy that 50-foot right of way. And I think the question I had was would do that work? And it's certainly not you, but if the residents that abut, who have that legal access to that right of way, they are the ones that could perform that work to make it accessible by a vehicle. But when we visited, it looked like it satisfied the 50-foot right of way, which certainly is maybe a concern for neighbors.
Right.
So, sorry, is that the location of the existing fence?
The proposed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So And if I can ask this, what's the work in the first land court order that's already been met? The work that you're proposing to do that land court is already supporting? Which part of the NOI does that cover? Sorry.
That's the removal of the wood chips.
Okay.
Removal of the wood chips.
Yep.
Relocation of the existing stockade fence to outside of the 50-foot right-of-way.
Okay.
Which requires some tree removal.
And the removal of obstructions in the existing right-of-way.
For all those flag trees that we saw.
And the removal of obstructions within the existing right-of-way, I think the existing right-of-way may change locations. I think, and that's what, right, because you're proposing that it right now it on paper goes through that pond, right? And you're proposing that it swoops up, right?
But effectively, opposite the existing residences, that 50-foot right-of-way
is still intact. So I think what we're just trying to do, and maybe you could help us do this, is that we want to make sure that land court, that you have approval for that easement adjustment prior to like removing all those trees. So let's just say wildly, something doesn't happen and that nobody agrees to that adjustment that you're proposing, your counterclaim. You know, we wouldn't necessarily want to see all those trees removed and for no reason in that area if they don't agree, if there is not an agreement that there's going to be access would be allowed through
Can
there.
I just access a plan for a moment?
Yeah, got the plans over there.
Because I think the land court that they have allows the obstructions to be removed. I think the one they're pursuing in land court now is the extension through the 50-foot buffer. So I think
the primary easement goes through that little pond, right?
Yeah, right.
And then your proposal is to swoop it up and move it closer to Ruse.
Right, but for this portion of the right-of-way, there are trees that would be slated for removal that can be performed
Absolutely.
now.
But this little
in the
segment
original.
here, in the buffer zone, that's new, that they haven't agreed to and everything. How can we condition that work to not just happen until you get approval that is?
I'm in agreement with that. That makes sense. That any work beyond the last residence can be conditional upon.
Okay, great. That's what we were trying to get to, is like something that made sense there so that the court orders can kind of work themselves out.
I think that is a reasonable markation.
And if land court comes back and there's new and additional work, you can amend the NOI.
That's right.
On top of that as well.
That's right.
So we would condition the work for beyond that first address.
Yeah.
And then
not necessarily.
anything within the swoop
Yeah.
is pending.
Correct. Yeah, and it pretty much, I mean, you can use that as, you know, a reference, but wherever the first land court, whatever that includes, that's all that can be. The approved land court is the work that can be done with the approval of this NOI.
Up to 19.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question. What would be the purpose of that? Wouldn't you have like a contractor be coming out and take out all of the, everything at one shot?
That's compliance with the land court.
Oh, okay, they have a deadline. Okay, all right.
That is what the land court ordered us to do.
I'm just curious.
Okay. Right. If there's any other comments, I think we can approve this NOI.
Just one quick comment, just to maybe address the lady's question. I just want to remind Jenna and the commission that with respect to the question about the pedestrian access and the rights and the language we had in the original notice of intent, we did issue a supplemental document to you clarifying that language, and it was supported by a copy of the land court. So just to let you know, that's on record. We did clarify that.
Yeah. What we had discussed as a group was that if the time ever comes that someone wants to make improvements, if they want to use their ability to improve that land, that would have to come through conservation. So-
Right.
And that would be a notice of intent that then we would review any of that as a separate, entirely separate thing.
Yep.
And I think we would also